The bolt seared in bluish-white intensity, crackling with raw power as jagged arcs of energy tore through the air, scorching the clouds with electric flashes before slamming into the earth. And at the point of impact stood a lone figure. Broad-shouldered and sporting a cropped haircut, he anchored himself like a cliff as chaos detonated around him, completely unmoved. Rain hammered his hulking frame, his steely gaze locked ahead. Cracked earth buckled beneath him as shockwaves pulsed from his stance. This was no ordinary warrior. Dan Wusung, the man the world called the Fist King, a crown he carved in battle. His name thundered through the Jianghu with reverence and dread. Few knew his true name. Most only felt the crushing power of his fists. Injury racked Dan. He froze in a ring of bodies, every sight laying bare the aftermath of a brutal ambush. His eyes narrowed into razor slits as he zeroed in on the remaining threats. Only two silhouettes stood. He towered, his long black hair bound behind him, clad in shadowy garb that oozed a cold, silent menace. The other stood draped in a white and purple robe, twirling a traditional folding fan with lazy precision, each slow sweep radiating a cool, calculating calm. Dan hissed under his breath, sizing them up. Both moved like seasoned pros and were total strangers. Dan launched the man beside him back into his allies and snarled, "I'm returning your subordinate." A cry ripped from him as he was hurled toward one of the two remaining foes. "Sword Demon! Please help me!" The man called the Sword Demon yanked his blade free without a second's hesitation. He cleaved the man in two, snuffing out his scream instantly. Dan felt the sheer brutality slam into him. He felled his own ally with a single ruthless strike. No hesitation. The sigil carved into his blade and the merciless carnage on display tore away every doubt in Dan. He knew exactly what that meant. "These two!" Dan locked his gaze on the demonic faction's members and called them out, his voice calm and unshakable. Your demon's lips curled into a cold, mocking smirk. He roared his admiration for the Fist King's incredible staying power, declaring the title well-deserved. Dan brushed off their flattery and, voice like a blade, warned he'd end this in 10 strikes. Sword Demon unleashed a mocking, booming laugh at the arrogance and he hurled himself forward to meet him in battle. Wind howled around them as Dan reared his lightning-wreathed hand and hurtled into the fray. The storm overhead howled, answering every strike he unleashed. "Right at the start!" A duel. 3. Each counted strike slammed home. The Sword Demon staggered beneath the barrage, but something was off. By the 9th blow, Dan paused. Alarm flared. His fists packed brutal power. Yet every strike missed the enemy's most vulnerable points. Invisible hands clamped him fast as his senses snapped to the distant cliffs. And there, towering over the battlefield, the other man stood, fan in hand. A halo of glowing violet energy crackled around him as he watched with unnerving calm, his stance radiating cold, unshakable confidence. Dan ground his jaw as that man barged in, somehow blocking him before he could react. The Sword Demon pounced the moment attention slipped, turning the distraction into his opening. He launched his blade like a missile, and it crashed into Dan, piercing his body. He retched, blood splattering across his mouth. Sword Demon roared that the Fist King's era was over. Dan refused to fall. A sword still embedded in his body, he surged forward, tore through the mystical restraint, and slammed a crushing punch into the Sword Demon's face. The blade screamed past, barely nicking the Sword Demon on his face. A crimson slash split his cheek, and despair never came. He barked a cold laugh, then conceded through a crooked smile. "You're damn good at fighting, Fist King." The man with the fan slid down the cliff and snapped, "That was way too close!" Sword Demon sneered, sarcasm dripping from his voice as he slammed the fan wielder for letting their restraint snap. Closing in on Dan again, the Sword Demon sneered, trying to hurl one final mocking barb. He didn't get to finish. Dan's fist slammed into him again. The 10th blow landed. Blood gushed from the Sword Demon's mouth as he crumpled. Bloodied and shattered, Dan croaked his final thoughts. Every ounce of strength drained away. He'd fulfilled his promise after 10 strikes. Dan Wusung, the Fist King, begged for one last chance. Then he crumpled and was cut down by the demonic faction. Far away, lightning tore the sky open again. At the remote Juhua Mountain safe house, a jagged spear of electric blue energy ripped up from the earth. A yellow-robed figure inside the nearby building snapped their head up at the alarm. Shock flared inside a young, impossible to ignore. She lunged to his side as he came to in bed, voice raw with panic as she cried, "Are you okay?" Dan Wusung's eyes snapped open, disoriented, and he swept his gaze across the room. His eyes swam with confusion as he croaked, "Where am I? Someone treated me?" He pushed himself upright, muttering under his breath. Not a single wound remained. Every injury from the battle had vanished. Unsure if someone had treated him, the young woman pressed a cup of water into his hands and, bewildered, blurted, "First young master," a title he didn't recognize. Dan snapped his gaze to the nearby mirror, and his face hardened into a shadowed mask. He spat, blasting a spray of water across the room. "Who put a mask on my face?" he muttered. And when his fingers grazed his skin, a shock of cold shot up his arm. Seams vanished, edges melted away. This wasn't a mask. Panic ripped across his face. The attendant bolted, vowing to fetch the physician at once. Dan's hand slammed into his face, disbelief roaring through him. Outside, the attendant hissed under her breath, voice trembling as the young master's behavior that day slipped into something unnervingly strange. Back in the room, Dan hissed under his breath. It couldn't have been. They weren't from the demonic faction. If anyone here could pull this off, the demonic faction would have already seized the Zhenghu. Dan's thoughts snapped to one burning question. Who is this person? He ripped himself from the sheets and hauled his body upright, battling the bed's pull. He lurched across the room, each step a wild wobble like a newborn fawn finding its legs. Weakness dripped off him. Training never touched him. Utterly useless. His gaze snapped to a stack of labeled documents sprawled across the table. Meet the Ona Merchant Group. The name flared in his mind. A sprawling trading house by Juhua Mountain. Famous enough that he'd heard of it, even though he'd never dealt with merchants. Every envelope screamed the name Li Jinian, the firstborn heir. Reading through them, Dan's breath hitched as he discovered they teemed with desperate pleas for cash, brazen invitations to gamble, and sultry letters from women. The soul shackled to this body was a total loser. A storm of thoughts raged in his head. This wasn't sorcery or an illusion. No strange energy pulsed in him. Then the woman called him First Young Master, confirming he inhabited Li Jinyan's body, and a dizzying realization slammed into him. Could this be reincarnation? He didn't even get a moment to gather his thoughts. A man barreled into the room, Gongsun Myung, the household physician, a calm force with steady hands who kept the household whole. Alarm laced his words as the man voiced concern over, "Brace yourself for Dan's behavior." Dan burst into view. Now Li Jinian storms onto the scene. She snubbed him with a single icy wave like he meant nothing. Gong shot up and declared he'd brought Jinyan's favorite meal, chicken soup. Then the bowl arrived, steam billowing and hope exploding across the table. Dan's gaze sharpened, zeroing in on the dragon and phoenix soup. It fueled the healthy, but for the frail original Li Jinian, it twisted into poison. Dan's gut tensed when the physician ghosted a hand to his wrist earlier. That subtle attempt to take his pulse felt far too calculated to be innocent. He feigned cooperation, sliding into the act like a pro. They leaned in and asked how long the Dragon Phoenix martial competition had been running. The physician shrugged and tossed off. About 200 years. A shadow slammed across Dan's face. His death was still fresh, so the demonic faction could still be alive. He dismissed the man with a weary flourish, faking collapse. Gong froze for a heartbeat, then obeyed. Alone now, Dan whipped his head around one last time. Surrounded by bears crashing through the brush, deceivers twisting truth into traps, and snakes coiling to strike. The demonic faction still loomed over the land like a suffocating shadow. But this time he'd finish the job. Rage coiled in his throat as he hissed, "One punch!" One move, and it's over this time. A ritual breakfast perched on a low wooden table. Grilled skewers piled with seasoned meats, a bowl of steaming white rice sending lazy curls of steam, and beside it a delicate porcelain cup cradling warm, fragrant tea. Every piece laid out like a ceremony, radiating quiet tradition and razor-calm precision. A servant's jaw dropped and a breathy "wow" spilled from her wide eyes as she turned to her companion, stunned that the young master had started eating full meals again. Just recently he'd only managed porridge, and the other servant chuckled, nodded, and said he's been eating with such appetite lately, and should be back from his morning walk any moment now. Right on cue, Li Jinian exploded onto the scene. Formerly Dan Wu-sung, he stepped into the room shirtless, sweat shimmering on his sculpted frame, breath measured and heavy, the exhausted calm of someone ripped straight from a brutal training session. He shot a quick look at the table and nodded in approval, asking offhand, "Oh, breakfast's already prepared?" The servants sank into silent bows, and he grinned. "Well done. Keep breakfast like this from now on," he barked, and one of them snapped to attention and shot back. "Yes, sir." Li Jinian slid a fresh robe over his shoulders, as the servants behind him huddled and whispered. "He looks so much healthier now," one breathed. The other giggled and whispered, "I know, right?" A soft knock sliced through the silence, cutting the moment short, and one of the servants he spun and announced that physician Gongsun Myung had come to visit the young master. Li Jinyan's jaw tightened. He snapped a curt nod and barked, "Let him in." Gongsun Myung eased into the room, a low mutter barely escaping his lips. "He's so rude." Gongsun Myung blusters on in his trademark exaggerated style. "Sir, he cried, enthusiasm exploding from him as he flung his arms wide like he was embracing a long-lost friend. Li Jinian let a tight, calculating smirk tug at his lips as he muttered under his breath. I still can't fathom why he grovels like that. His eyes narrowing with amusement as he added, Shall I try catching this little rat today? He smoothed his tone into icy calm and pinned the physician with a direct question. What brings you here, Physician Gongsun? Gongsun feigned innocence and sputtered. What do you mean, sir? You vanished without a word, and the loneliness ate me alive, so I came. But your complexion's completely different now, and every ounce of effort I poured in feels pointless. Li Jinian arched a brow, challenge simmering in his gaze. Effort? You mean that flashy ploy you cooked up? The Dragon Phoenix soup stunt? Soon's eyes snapped wide, panic ricocheting in his gaze. Sir, hold up. You're getting it twisted. The Dragon Phoenix soup doesn't grant miracles. It's a nourishing tonic, nothing more. Legionian sneered. Oh really? I thought it was poison. Gongsun froze, muscles coiling, and snapped. What, sir? I'm Gongsun Mayung, your personal physician. If I'm not welcome here, he said, dipping his head in a brief, formal bow, then I'll take my leave. Li Jinian slit his eyes into a razor-sharp glare. You burst in unbidden, and now you vanish without my permission. His voice sliced the air like ice. Do you think you're the master here, not me? Gongsun recoiled, struck by the retort's knife edge. Li Jinian burst into laughter, his voice suddenly light. Ha ha, I'm just joking. Gongsun let out a sheepish chuckle, an awkward ah ha ha escaping him. Li Jinian barked a sharp order. I need to send a letter. Bring me the writing tools from the desk. Yes, sir, I'll do that, Gongsun replied, springing into action. Li Jinian's voice snapped. I'll dictate, you write. And Gongsun nodded sharply. Yes, please begin. Li Jinian opened his message in a deceptively calm tone, then admitted that Sir Li Jinian's severe illness pins him to the villa for some time and, with his life stubbornly long, he begs. What should I do next? When the words finally sank in, Gongsun froze as a shadow swallowed his expression. Li Jinian barked, frost lacing every word. What's wrong? Why aren't you writing it down? Gongsun's words died in his throat. He choked out, Sir, what are you saying? Without warning, Li Jinian slung a wooden chopstick and it screamed past Gongsun's face. It slammed into the wall behind him and lodged itself deep in the stone, mere inches from his throat. His whole life hung on that sliver of air. Hey, old man, Li Jinian barked, humor stripped from his voice. I'm not the Li Jinian of the past anymore. He staggers back, shaken to his core. Sir, what on earth do you mean? Li Jinian kept his cool, but his words landed like sledgehammers. First, he zeroed in on the Dragon Phoenix soup. To a healthy man, it hits like a tonic. To someone as ill as I am, that's poison. And you poison me too. Doctor, sear that into your bones. You actually thought you could sneak a pulse check when I didn't die and I'd never catch you? His voice sank into a razor-edged whisper. And you couldn't hide that you wanted me dead. Gongsun's mask of civility finally shattered. His eyes snapped into cold, narrowing slits. Reginian sat planted, casual on the surface and unyielding at the core. You're not acting alone. Write down the name of the one who gave you orders. Gongsun tore his gaze away, voice cracking as he begged. Why are you doing this, sir? How could you suspect a kind man like me? He exhaled a slow, hollow breath. Sigh. Gongsun's demeanor snapped hard as iron. His voice cut the air like ice. A taunt sliced the air. Even a scoundrel like you has a conscience, huh? Li Jinian shot back. Your mask falls at last, Gongsun, he sneered. I tried to let you leave with your dignity intact. How foolish, Gongsun snarled. Now there's no other way. If I have to, I'll slaughter every servant and silence them. His hand dove beneath his clothes and snatched the hidden weapon. He failed to move fast enough to finish it in one clean, brutal motion. Li Jinian smashed his fist into the traitor's skull. One brutal strike that ended the treachery. Don't you dare get distracted while I'm talking, he muttered, his voice low and dangerous. Li Jinian loomed over the corpse, still devouring his meal as a grimace carved across his face. Agony rips through me. What a pitiful shell this body has become. He stared down at Gongsun's lifeless form. I have to pull my strength back. Fast, he told himself. He whispered under his breath. Once I do, it won't matter if the mastermind is the entire Yonha merchant group. When I rejoin the group, I'll plunge into Gongsun Mayong's web of connections and drag every hidden thread into the light. A jagged bolt of pain stabbed through his skull. He slammed his hands to his temples as someone else's memories crashed into his skull. For the original Li Jinian, the flood of images slammed in. Razor-sharp clarity and a hollow, burning sorrow. And that was exactly what it was, he whispered, tears carving warm paths down his cheeks. Behold Li Jinian, the Yunha merchant group's firstborn scion. the heir of its influential merchant house. He'd been born giftless. No razor mind like his second brothers and no crushing power like his thirds. He stood between them empty-handed. To bury his inadequacies beneath a glossy, confident facade, he dove headfirst into a gilded abyss, blowing fortunes on decadence and drowning himself in every vice. When the truth finally hit him, he saw he'd wrecked his reputation, ruined his health, and torn his family apart. Too late. They'd banished him to this remote villa. If these memories are right, I'll die in exile, Lee Jinny whispered. The main family would toss me aside without a second thought. And at first the real nightmare was waking up in this body with its past sealed off from me. At last, I can dive headfirst back into martial arts. His gaze snapped down to his own hands. I think he squandered such an innately gifted body. Armed with memories from my past life and a handful of rare elixirs, I can claw my way back to the top. His eyes snapped to the pouch, heavy and jangling with coins. Money won't stand in our way. His gaze snagged on Gongsun's corpse. He muttered, I should bury that. 1 year later, at the Juhua Mountain safe house, a young man in uniform strode up to the villa gates, a formal letter clutched in his hand, his steps steady. His eyes darted across the room like lightning, charged with confidence, and he barked, Hello, at one of the servants. My hands burn with a letter meant for young Master Li Zhenian. Where can I find him? The servant shrugged and drawled, Oh, he's right over there, pointing to Mok Inseop, a member of the Yunha Merchant Group's personal guard squad. He snapped his head to follow her gaze, and when the figure beyond the courtyard came into view, air ripped from his lungs, he choked out, That's young master?
Lee, Jinny's on!
Seasons thundered past, and in that time, Lee Jinian's energy core erupted to life. He carved the survival martial techniques into his flesh, the enlightened mobility art, the enlightened body art, and the rapid stride, and above all plunged into the lightning discipline, the white lightning 10-phase art, surging into the 4th phase as everything clicked into place. Guinean folded into a cross-legged lotus, his focus honed to a razor point. Even with progress roaring forward, it still wasn't enough. He unleashed the technique. One thought pounded inside his skull. It still fell crushingly short. A voice sliced through his focus. Moken Siop swept in, bowed low with crisp respect and said, It's been a long time. I'm Moken Siop of the guard squad. I stride in clutching a letter from the main clan. Pyongyang shot him a curt nod and asked to see the letter. As he slid it into her hands, Ma Siop froze, disbelief hammering his chest. Was this really the fragile young master he'd once known? Jinian was unrecognizable, nothing like that weak shadow from before. Jinian snatched the letter, a flicker of irritation in his voice as he muttered that his arm was about to fall off. The letter held only a few words, but they struck like a punch to the gut. The head of the Yunha Merchant Group, his father, had crumpled, pinned to his bed by a sudden, unexplained illness. Command of the group fell to Jinyan, and as the decree was read, he echoed every word. Father collapsed without warning, and now lies pinned to his bed, and no one can explain why. Insop froze, biting back his reply as a theory about the Ouyang clan ignited in his mind. It looked like the plan was pulling the strings. The gang had long been extorting them under the guise of tributes, and those payments had swollen into a crushing burden, Jinyan asked, voice cool as steel. If the Ouyang clan had done anything to justify hiking those fees, Inseop, seething, snapped that they hadn't. Then his fury poured out as he accused the Ouyang clan of stonewalling every request to talk, even when that pint-sized deity sect tried to slam outrageous tariffs onto every trade caravan. Their answer snapped like a blade. We only deal with the Una Merchant Group's main clan. And even then they refused to lift a finger. The guard captain swallowed his protest. He wouldn't dare defy someone like Ouyang Hu. Jinyan rolled the name over in his mouth. Ouyang Hu. He'd heard it before. A dominant force in the Jianghu. A name even Jinyan instantly recognized. He figured a man like Wu Yang would sneer at merchant houses. Then he smirked and asked, So, if I take care of the Wu Yang clan, this problem goes away? Inseop staggered at the audacious suggestion, then fired back that a darker, decisive reason had felled the merchant leader. Rage boiled in their veins as Jinyan's younger brothers, the second and third sons, drew steel and collided in a savage sword duel. Their father saw the scene and crumpled, as if rage had felled him, and Jinyan gaped, stunned into disbelief. They launched into a sword fight right in front of him. He let out a deep, weary sigh as Inseop scrambled to promise he wouldn't be held responsible. Jinyan shook his head and snapped, No, I can't just sit by and watch. He thrust the letter back and sprang to his feet. I'll head out myself. Back at headquarters, Moken Siop ripped through every detail for his fellow guards, swearing Jinyan had completely change ripped through him. He emerged a true martial artist. The colleagues by his side, a chorus of mocking laughter burst out as they scoffed. insisting it was more believable that Jinyan dominated the bedroom. His martial skills were a joke by comparison. Silence slammed into the crowd. Han Yup, vice captain of the guard squad, loomed behind one of the loudmouths. His face locked like a vault as he confirmed, flat and steady, that Jinyan had regained his health. Han Yup murmured aloud, memories snapping into place. Jinyan had sported a chiseled warrior's build even as a child, and he remembered every time he'd personally hammered martial arts into the young master. Curiosity sharp in his voice, he pressed Inseop about when Jinyan would return. Inseop admitted he didn't know, only that Jinyan was on his way, when a shout from beyond the gates rang out. "Young Master Jinyan has arrived," Xiap hissed under his breath. "Which is now, I guess." Han Yup barked for a formal greeting on the spot. A guard scoffed, daring to question bowing to someone like Jinyan, and Han Yup snapped back, reminding him who paid their salaries and ordering him to stop whining. Jinyan froze at the gate, jaw dropping as the Unimerchant Group's colossal estate loomed far larger than anything he'd ever imagined. The truth slammed into him. The original Li Jinyan wasn't just well off, he was obscenely rich. He burst into the world clutching a silver spoon, privilege stitched into his fate. He ordered his 2 servants to rest and strode to his father's chamber. They bowed deeply and obeyed. He plunged deeper into the compound. Jinyan's breath hitched and his mind raced. Why hadn't anyone greeted him? Then, out of nowhere, everything exploded into motion. Guards surged into view and they dropped into a bow, reverence pouring from them. Relief erupts through the hall. "Young Master Jinyan, you've returned safe and sound." Han Yup surged forward and snapped into a sharp bow, declaring, "I'm Han Yup, vice captain of the guard squad. You barely look like yourself, sir. I'm so relieved to see you healthy." A guard hissed under his breath, branding Han Yup shameless. He couldn't. The vice captain swallowed his pride and bowed to the man who had always looked down on him. Jinyan cracked a grin and erupted into an enthusiastic reply. They rolled out the red carpet for a troublemaker. "Thank you, everyone." The guards gaped, rooted to the spot. He shattered the silence with a greeting. They murmured in disbelief. "That good-for-nothing actually greeted us?" Inseop lit up, and I grinned. "Told you he's changed." Even the most skeptical guard conceded, voice cracking. He was staring at a stranger who felt more like an ally than a foe. Relief and pride washed over Han Yup, softening his face into a quiet, triumphant smile. He swept Jinny toward the merchant leader's residence. "I've already told your father I'm coming to visit," he said. Jinyan snapped a crisp nod and shot him a heartfelt, "Thank you." As they strode on, a mocking voice sliced the air and sneered, "Well, well, would you believe it? The infamous pervert Jinyan himself, Li Jae-yan, the 3rd son." John locked onto his older brother, scanning him until the truth hit. He looked like a different man. Even his expression flipped like a switch. He clamped a firm hand down on Jinny's shoulder and sneered. Han Yeop's eyes snapped wide with concern as he dredged up the brutal image of Jae-yan mercilessly beating Jinyan, clutching that memory like a last-ditch gambit to calm the chaos. He lunged in, snatched Jae-yan's hand away, plastered on a diplomatic smile, and said, "You two must be thrilled to see each other again." Rage boiled in Jae-yan as he slapped Han Yeop's hand away and lashed out, furious at being touched without permission. Dealing with this good-for-nothing wasn't enough, he snarled. "Now you're disrespecting me too?" With the scene teetering on the edge, Jinyan's calm voice sliced through the tension as he called Jae-hyun's name. A single featherlight sweep, he cupped his younger brother's face, fingers hovering like a hesitant caress. Jaehyun blinked, confusion clouding his eyes as he whispered, "What is—" He never got the last word. Jinny's fist slammed clean into his face. Blood exploded outward, spraying crimson into the air. Han Yup gaped, his mind scrambling as shock slammed into him, leaving him unable to grasp what had just happened. Jaehyun crumpled to the ground, dazed, stammering, "What? What the hell?" Jinyon stayed ice cold. He flashed a grin, called Jaehyun, and crowed, "I was so excited on my way here." Then he seized Jaehyun's shoulder in a crushing grip. He vice-gripped his younger brother until a scream of pain ripped free. John roared, "You insane bastard!" Jinyon leaned in, smirk snapping across his face. "Insane bastard? You should be calling me Big Brother." A ripple of commotion swept the halls. At the back, a man clutching scrolls froze. Brow knotted, he hissed, "That's father's room." The man was Li Huaiyan, 2nd son of the Yunha Merchant Group and its current overseer, closing in on Han Yeop. Huaiyun barked, "What's all this ruckus?" Han Yi snapped his head up. "Ah, overseer, the 1st and 3rd young masters are arguing." And Huaiyun's face went dark. He ground out a frustrated mutter. Number 3 must have been hounding him again. "What are you all doing? Rooted to the spot when you should be charging in and stopping them." He snapped, "My older brother," with urgent force and charged toward the commotion. Inside, Jinyon's voice stayed stone cold as he hissed to Jian, "Be quiet. We're right in front of Father's room. He snapped his head around as Huayuan strode in and murmured, Is that you, Huayuan? Jinian's commanding presence slammed into Huayan, leaving him stunned and only able to sputter a confused, The three brothers packed into the room. Huayan cradled a teacup, sipping coolly. Jinian loomed before Jaehyun. Jaehyun knelt on the ground, arms raised in punishment. Word reached me that you'd returned, Huayuan said, eyes locked on his elder brother. You look in fine health. I'm fine now, Jinian tossed off with a lazy grin, shrugging the whole ordeal away. His eyes snagged on the wound in Huayan's hand and he snapped, Did the third do that to you? Huayan answered, It's not serious. He couldn't finish before Jinny cut him off with a stinging slap cracked across Jian's cheek. Don't ever lift a sword against your older brother. Jinian's voice sliced cold. Unless you wanna. Stunned, Jaeon shot back, Okay. When Jinian arched an eyebrow, Jaeon choked out, I understand, as his mind scrambled to catch up with what had just happened. Jaehyun muttered under his breath, disbelief raw and ragged in his voice. Lee Jinian unleashed a brutal beatdown on me. Once, weakness consumed him. Huayuan, equally stunned, murmured. He actually humbled Jaeon. His mind flashing back to the time Jinyan's curiosity nearly got him beaten. Huayuan demanded, Did something happen at the safe house? You look like a totally different person. Jinyan smirked and shot back, Is that so? You've got a good eye. He whipped his gaze to the scrolls and asked, What's all this? Someone demanded. That's the roster I'm bringing to the conference tomorrow, Huayan declared. Jinyan scanned the names and muttered, Just a list of employees. Curiosity about who recommended Gongsun Myung flaring for a beat before he shrugged it off. That answer didn't matter anymore. His eyes pinched as he added, It was the one who dragged in everyone, from the vice guard squad leader down to the front gate guards. Behold Uyang-hu. His voice snapped into something cold and razor-sharp. He barked, If either of you is in league with the Uyang clan, speak now. Huayan snapped back instantly. You seriously think that could actually happen? Jaeon snapped back, voice blazing. That's insane. I'd rather die than let another clan seize our business. Huayan nodded, steel in his eyes. Exactly. The Una merchant group was built by father with his own hands. Jinian exhaled, relief cracking through him, and muttered under his breath, I'm glad to hear that. At least I won't have to kill them. He sprang to his feet and demanded, Are all the higher-ups attending the conference tomorrow? Huayuan snapped back a firm, Yes. Unease still gnawed at him over his brother's change as Jinian said, Good. Then I'll attend too. And strode off without another word. He darted from the room. Huh? Where are you going? Huayan barked after him. To see father, Jinian shot back, already gone. Huayuan's eyes seared the doorway as he whispered, What happened at the safe house? Jaeon exploded into a tantrum, screaming, I should have gone to Juhua Mountain. Me! Ah! Outside their father's chamber, a voice bellowed through the door. Merchant group leader, the eldest son is here. The old man barked back, Let him in. Jinian stormed in. His father Li Shengmin, leader of the Una merchant group, croaked, You're here. He snapped, What's that racket outside? Jinian scoffed and waved it away. Nothing important. I heard you're unwell from stress, someone said. Xiongmin sighed. Stress has shadowed me forever, and now this old body is finally cracking. He closed the distance and cupped Jinian's face with a gentle hand, whispering, You've changed a lot, for the better. A soft grin curled his lips as he asked, Your face looks different. Are you really Jinny? Jinny nodded. Yes, and in turn, inside he drowned in his own thoughts. Strange. I grew up without parents, so I never knew what having a father felt like. But inside Li Jinyun's memories, the past slammed into focus. His father commanded respect, a towering man of honor whose courage left everyone in awe. He cradled his father's paper-thin hands, voice breaking as he whispered. When did he become so small? He bellowed his vow. Father, don't worry. We'll hunt down and obliterate whatever's poisoning your peace. I've got this. Rest easy. I'll see it through. Eliminate? The old man blurted, worry like a blade in his voice. Jinian yanked a smile onto his face and snapped, It's nothing. Don't worry. At dawn the next day, the Una Merchant Group's conference exploded to life. Uyang-hu took his place among the attendees. He led the guard squad like a living weapon. An Uyang clan martial master. A subordinate leaned in and hissed, Guard squad leader, no way. That's the eldest son. Why has he shown up here? Uyang-hu flashed a smug smirk, but he must be racked with worry over his spot in the group. In the meeting, Huayan barreled through the business talk and barked, Anyone got a different take? No? Then I'm moving on. I do. Wu Yong shot in, confidence blazing through every syllable. Rumor reached my ears. The first young master returned, yet still stands unguarded. I have a recommendation. Murmurs rippled through the room as a man leaned in and hissed. Half the group's already under the Ouyang clan, and another snapped, "Hey!" Wu Young-Hu's hand lashed out, swatting his teacups into the air. Wu Young flashed a wicked grin and jeered. "Oops, my hand slipped. My bad. Anyone going to speak up about my suggestion? Or are we letting this room drown in silence?" A sneer twisted his lips as a smug thought-so flickered through his mind. Genion rocketed to his feet. "You bet. I've got complaints boiling over." He strode forward and every eye snapped to him. "I'd like to make a suggestion too," he said, his voice sharpening. A suggestion to fire the guard squad leader, Wu Yang-Hu, ripped through the room and unleashed a wave of shocked gasps. Shock hammered the UNHA members into silence, their jaws dropping. The Ouyang representatives exploded into laughter. One man chuckled. "Goodness, what a joke." And another shot back. "Doesn't he know how much the squad leaders have done for the group's security?" "Fire me?" Ouyang erupted into a booming laugh. "Months trapped in that bed scrambled your instincts about how the world works. You don't get a say." Jinion's face snapped into a cold mask as he hissed. "Is that so?" It struck without warning. He slammed his fist into the floor, a shockwave rippling out that cut the room dead silent. "You must have totally blanked," Jinion sneered. "A little influence doesn't make you untouchable." Wu Young's confident smirk died on his lips. Jinion slashed the silence with his voice, declaring, "The Yuna merchant group answers to me." Moments before the assembly, Li Huayun shot a panicked look at Li Jinyan and demanded, "Why are you here? Are you really planning to dismiss Guard Captain Wu Yonghu? Is that why you came? We're just a merchant group. This is above our pay grade to confront someone like him." Jinyan locked onto Huayan with an unblinking, steel-hard stare. "Keep the ploy rolling. Dare to scoff at a Jianghu martial artist? The ignorant get devoured. Look at our merchant group. They're being devoured alive right now." Huayuan's thoughts churned silently behind his eyes. He absolutely nailed it. When did the Ouyang clan explode into such raw power right here? Jinyan planted a steady hand on his shoulder and smiled, his calm anchoring the moment. "Don't worry. I'm your older brother. I'll take the reins and fix this," Hanyup murmured, skepticism coiling through his words. "Handle it." He mirrored that brother. A young subordinate hurled himself forward, blade flashing. "Young Master Jinyan!" Someone screamed. "What madness is this?" "Oh!" Young Hu hissed under his breath. "That troublemaker! Has he lost his mind?" Captain Han Yop lunged in without a second to spare and barked, "Insolent! You dared to raise a blade at young Master Jinian? Step back at once!" The command barked. Jinian's expression hardened into a cold shadow as she hissed, "You're right. That was truly insolent. You punk kids pulled steel on your boss. You just signed your death warrant." A pang of pity hit me, so I figured I might just offer him compensation. Wu Young shot me a scowl. "Feel sorry?" Jinian snarled, closing the distance. "You torpedoed his retirement plans. You unleashed Gongsun Myung to try and assassinate me while I was still recovering. You ignited a brutal feud between my second and third brothers. Their bloodletting smooths your path. And thanks to, you watched your father crumple to the floor. If you'd played one of my brothers like a pawn, you could have seized the Yuna merchant group without lifting a finger." Wu Young sneered, a sharp "Ha!" slicing through the air. "Young Master Jinsen, you're deluding yourself." Leon planted a steady, reassuring hand on Wu Yang's shoulder, but Gongsun Myung, sent to kill me, fell beneath my blade. Wu Young's face snapped into a grim mask. "You killed Gongsun Myung." Jinian spun away like it cost him nothing. "Don't be too sad. With a single strike, I sent him off. If your goal was to devour a major merchant consortium, you should have hit them harder. I'm filing claims for every scrap of damage you left behind." Rage convulsed Ouyang as he spat. You arrogant brat!" Jinny whipped his head over his shoulder and snapped, "Got you." Right as Ouyang launched himself forward, Jinny dropped his guard. Their auras slammed into each other, exploding into a thunderous gust that tore through the hall. A chorus of gasps ricocheted off the walls. Lightning crackles around him. He's a martial arts master? Young Master Jinny ripped aside the defense, letting the captain's strike thunder through. Jinny snapped into a dramatic wince. "Ouch. Are you seriously going to hit someone who just got back up?" A smirk curled on his lips. "Maybe this'll fly. It's an official duel." Wu Young hissed back, venom coating every word. That arrogant fool, cockier than a chick that had just learned to fly. He thundered to the onlookers, the guard squad, the Ouyang clan, the witnesses. "Young Master Jinyan has agreed. An official duel begins." A wild grin split my face. I'm happy now. Jinian dipped low and dove straight into the fight. A war-ready stance, then a life-or-death duel ignited. A gasp ripped through the room as Wu Yang drew his sword and spat. "Young Master Jinyan, you've clearly trained under an impressive sect. Your skill shot up fast, but you're inexperienced, and I'll make you learn the difference." He hurled himself forward. Jinny blurred aside, dodging with effortless grace. He sneered, Experience. It pulsed, crackling with a lightning aura. You showed up a century too soon to tangle with me, punk? Wu Young hurtled backward like a rag doll. He hissed, "What is this strength?" Jinny strode forward with deadly calm, every motion razor precise. "I'll show you the true difference experience makes," he roared as he unleashed the enlightened mobility art. He unleashed a brutal strike. Wu Young slammed his arms up to block, but the impact bit into him and nearly ripped him off his feet. A lightning-fast assault erupts. Something's wrong. He's no novice. Experience screams from every move. He moved like a battle-hardened martial master. Wu Young's breath hitched, a sharp gasp ripping from him. The subordinate's whispers cracked with shock. "He's going to finish him!" Wu Yang shouted, and surged forward, unleashing a three-form sword art. Jin Yun exploded forward, sprinting in a blur and erasing the distance in an instant. Wu Yang choked on his words. When did he even get here? Jinian delivered with pinpoint precision. A savage blow slammed into his chin. He barreled through the roof. Silence slammed into the room as dust billowed. It settled. In Li Xiongmin's chamber, his attendant peered out, alarm burning in his gaze. "Merchant group leader, what's unfolding here?" Xiongmin responds, eyes wide. "My son. It seems he's learned martial arts." From below, Wu Yang's subordinates stormed in. One sank to a knee before the fallen Wu Yang. Young Master Ginyan launched at his rival in a duel fought with fierce honor and flawless fairness. I watched it all unfold. If the Wu Yang clan keeps demanding revenge through duels from now on, the Yunhei merchant group will be trapped. There's no dodging those. Jinyan's voice sliced through the noise. "That's fine. I never thought I'd shake off grudges. Show me kindness and I'll repay it. Throw me hatred, and I'll strike back tenfold. Let them object. I'll shoulder every consequence alone. The Yunhai merchant groups won't get a scratch." Huayuan screamed, "Brother, that's reckless!" Jinyan rooted himself like a mountain and thundered, "The Yunhai merchant group is mine, and the father's. This is the guard squads, the very unit that welcomed me this morning, and to the stable hands who grin like kids, glued to the spectacle as I demolish my meal. We won't be played like puppets by scum like you. You understand? Get lost. You're all dismissed. Clear out." Han Yap, Mok Insiap, and the servants burst into triumphant grins, pride crackling in the air. Wu Yang's subordinates fumed, defeat burning like acid in their veins. One snapped as they walked away. "Well then, good luck." Onlookers erupted into thunderous cheers. Mok Insiap nearly sprang up until a guard clapped a hand over his mouth and snarled, "Quiet. Don't celebrate. Be ashamed. We let it come to this." But NCOP broke into a smile. Jinian roared for Huayuan. Huayuan snapped back. "Chief Administrator." "Yes, sir." Jinian snapped. "Brew me an elixir." "I vow to shoulder this burden. At least give me that support." Huayuan practically leapt with excitement, shouting he'll fetch the finest tonic and warning that with elixir orders to place and new guards to hire, you'll be swamped. Jinian mused, a spark igniting in his eyes as he said, "Oh, the new guard squad? I've already lined up candidates." Just days earlier, he stepped into the Yunha merchant group on his very first day. Li Jinyan thundered through the grand hall with Vice Captain Han Yeop at his side. They slid past a knot of Uyung clan idols sprawled about. Jin Young's stare went razor cold, silent disapproval cutting through the air. He spun to Han Yop and snapped, "Has the Vice Captain eaten yet?" OP snapped he hadn't. He'd been grinding since dawn. Jinny exhaled a soft, nearly inaudible sigh. His gaze locked onto the glaring contrast between the diligent. He watched some grind without rest, while others squandered their hours loafing. And he knew the shirkers were tied to the Uyang clan. Rage boiling, Jinny crushed the nearby railing and bellowed that those people had to be purged from the group. Jinyon steadied himself, composure snapping back, and declared the real challenge wasn't identifying who to dismiss. He'd been hunting for capable people to take their place. Narrowing his eyes, he murmured that he'd just found the right candidates. Later that evening, Jinyon strode into a neon-lit gambling den. The building throbbed with raucous laughter, drunken shouts tearing the air as flirtatious chatter sparked in every corner. Jinyon stormed in and the entrance guard snapped to attention. He recognized him on the spot. The man smirked and hailed him like an old friend, every word a sharpened barb. They jeered that the pushover had come crawling back to cough up another generous donation. Jinyon sneered, warning the man not to touch him. He'd only end up smeared with pig grease. Then, in a voice cold as steel, ordered him to open the door. The guard reeled, sputtering protests, but Jinyon paid him no mind and barreled into the room. In the main chamber, his entrance tore through the hush, and three men snapped their heads toward him. At the center stood a scar-faced man. Poisonous fox Chol Myung-ho split a venomous grin as he welcomed Jinyon, declaring he looked healthier now and that the recovery had clearly done him good. The other two barreled over to Jinyon, Yuk Jinbo and Yuk Myungbo, and shouted, "Welcome! It's been a while!" Myung-ho roared with laughter, then tore into them for not checking in on Jinyon while he was recovering. Myungbo blurted an apology, insisting they hadn't known, and Myung-ho brushed it off with a grin, admitting he'd been bored with no patsy left to swindle. With an exaggerated flourish, Myung-ho vowed to celebrate Jinyun's return to the Bunam merchant group by treating him to something special. Jinyun's silence warped his voice into a mocking sneer. He sneered and barked, demanding to know why the other had gone silent. Jinyun let the words slip out, his voice low and measured. "I was simply thinking." He wrestled with whether to kill Myung-ho, then, voice cold as steel, calmly said he had no use for a man like him. He wanted the twins. He could tell they were capable, and it was a waste to see them serving under Myung-ho. Having made up his mind, Jinyun declared his decision aloud. Agitation boiled in Myung-ho as he snapped, "Jinyun, are you even listening to me?" Jinyun's composure never cracked. He flashed a grin and asked Myung-ho to slide him the vault key. Myung-ho gaped, then echoed the words like a man testing reality, disbelief cracking his voice. He snapped, "Is Jinyun seriously demanding money?" Jinyun snapped his confirmation, then laid the debt bare. They forced him to sink thousands of nyang into the gambling den, then piled on crippling interest, vicious extortion, and the medical bills from the beating. He slapped a price on it, a hefty 100,000 nyang. Myung-ho erupted into a booming laugh. He sneered at Jinyun, unleashing a torrent of merciless taunts. Every sign screamed he'd learned arithmetic during his recovery. He vaulted to his feet. He sneered, declaring the vault held far more. Mountains of gold, walls of silver, and glittering jewels. Not a single piece could Jinyun claim. Every last thing belonged to someone else. He leaned in close and offered, "If you need money, Jinyun, just ask." He flat out refused to hand over the vault key to someone everyone had written off as a frail patient. Jinyun didn't answer. Silence slammed into the moment. Frustration snapped in Myung-ho. His voice turned venomous as he erupted, unleashing a barrage of insults at Jinyun. Finally he snapped, barking for his subordinates to tackle him and pin him to the ground. One of the twins lunged forward, hands snapping out to seize Jinyun. The young master exploded into action, every move striking like a bolt of lightning. Jinyun's gaze snaps to the man's wrist. He twisted it in one smooth, effortless motion. On the far side of the room, the second twin exploded forward, lunging to strike back. Jinyun slammed down into a razor-low crouch. He exploded sideways, slipping past the attack, and unleashed a thunderous kick that, a single crushing blow, shattered the twin's ankle. Jinyun froze for a heartbeat. Astonishment ripped through them. Their injuries couldn't silence it. Both twins heaved themselves to their feet, rising slowly in perfect mirrored motion. Not a single flicker of fear dared cross their eyes. Jinyun nodded to himself, admiration flaring in his eyes as he muttered that this was exactly the kind of value he'd been searching for. The twins exploded into action, lunging together and barreling straight at Jinyun. But in a heartbeat, everything flipped. He snapped into view between them. "Seize them by their heads!" Their skulls collided in a bone-jarring, deafening crack. He released them and spat a razor-sharp warning. "Don't move again." He snapped his focus back to Chela Myung-ho, who stood frozen in place. Visibly shaken, they trembled, eyes wide and breath snapping in short, sharp gasps. Jinyun's voice plunged lower, his stare turned to ice. Now it was just the two of them. Myung-ho lurched back, desperate, groping behind him for a hidden dagger as he snapped, voice trembling, that Jinyun should have at least warned him he'd been studying martial arts, not arithmetic, during his recovery. Jinyun cocked his head a fraction and spoke coolly, every word laced with sharp condescension. He scoffed. Myung-ho was always razor quick, so why was he so sluggish this time? Myung-ho's nerves snapped. He clamped his hand on the blade behind his back and snarled at Jinyun to back off. He reached for calm, urging them to talk it out. But panic only tightened its grip on him. He spat a curse under his breath and hissed there was nothing to fear. After Ed, Jinyun had always been a pushover. A sudden burst of aggression erupted from Myung-ho as he lunged forward, roaring that the first strike wins. Jinyun exploded into action, moving before anyone could react. He booted the table upright, hurling it into the blow's path to take the hit. He blasted his fist clean through the wooden surface, and clamped his hand around Myung-ho's head. A cold smirk curled his lips as he snapped back. "The counter-strike wins!" Then he slammed a lightning-fast strike into Myung-ho's skull, and a raw scream ripped from him. Outside, the guard we'd seen earlier breathed a grim warning. Someone's probably going to die tonight. Jinyun released Myung-ho, who crashed to the ground. Someone roared, "Snap out of it!" Myung-ho let out a bitter laugh, lungs heaving, spat that he was conscious and shot back. "What do you want now, Jinyun?" His face darkened and doubt gnawed at him. What had Jinyun really been doing during that so-called recovery? Did this even count as training? Was L driven to do this by revenge? He swore he hadn't been that cruel to Jinyun, didn't he? Panic slammed into him. He shot to his feet and began firing off desperate alternatives. He leaned in, voice raw, and pressed Jinyun. Did she want something else instead of the vault key? Anything at all? He beat his chest, insisting they'd been friends since childhood, and weaponized their shared past to drown Jinyan in guilt. Jinyan froze for a heartbeat, then nodded. After all, they were friends. Relief flooded Manhwa as he leaned in with a strained, fake warmth, insisting this was the right path, yanking Jinyan into a hug and vowing to stop hitting and bullying him. But Jinyan recoiled in disgust and snapped, "Let go. It's making me sick." Still grinning, Manhwa cranked the act up and declared them not just friends anymore, brothers. He roared to the twins across the room to greet their new big brother and congratulate him. Jinbo, jaw clenched, grudgingly congratulated Jinyan for getting stronger. Myungbo followed with a quiet congrats. Weech the exchange. Manhwa's smile flickered, a sharp twitch at the corner of his mouth. He spat at the idea of friendship or brotherhood. Jinyan was nothing but a bootlicker, a tail-wagging coward. The moment he escaped, he planned to snatch the twins and bolt, then slip into a fresh scam somewhere else without missing a beat. Jinyan zeroed in on the twins and shot them a blunt question. "Are you really okay with this?" When he declared someone his sworn brother, that vow bound them for life. Were they ready? The twins froze, eyes snapping to Myung-hoo for a cue to keep the charade alive. Myung-hoo barked, "Don't look at me like that." And when he declared them sworn brothers, that was enough. The twins answered in thunderous unison. "From now on we will serve Jinyan and our big brother." Manhwa clawed back his dwindling strength and unleashed a triumphant cheer. Jin Young's voice snapped into an eerie calm as he declared that now they were brothers. They had to decide who the biggest brother was. He ordered the twins outside and said he and Myungho would settle it and report back. Myungho blanched, his voice breaking into a shaky stammer. He scrambled to stall the inevitable moment. The twins snapped to the command and slipped out of the room. Only Jinyan and Myungho remained. Jinyan pinned him with a glare and demanded why he was hesitating, pressing him to decide this instant, internally. Panic ripped through Myungho. He was clueless about what Jin Young was gunning for. Jinyan pressed on, words tumbling out in a relentless rush. He shook his head. Disappointment carved across his face. Told Myungho exploiting loyal men like the twins was no way to live, and vowed from that moment to raise them right. He grinned, so bright and sharp it crawled under my skin. Myungho crumpled to his knees, defeat crushing the fight out of him. He hissed under his breath that Jinyan might as well pocket the cash. Jinyan had already crushed him, and now she was snatching the twins. Wasn't that the same as telling him to go die somewhere? He tore the air with a raw, despairing scream, begging to be killed. Jinyan's eyes narrowed to a razor edge, and he snapped his agreement on the spot. He cracked Myungho's chin with a savage kick and sent him hurtling through the air. He sneered, every word a razor of mockery. "You pushed yourself to the limit, friend." Then he exploded into a savage, bone-shattering barrage of strikes. Myungho staggered back, dazed and reeling as the assault slammed into him, his thoughts scrambling to catch up. He slammed on the brakes in his head. "Wait! He's about to end me. I'm not getting out of this alive." On his last gasp, he clawed at the air, flinging a trembling hand up and croaking his surrender. He thrust the key into Jinyan's hand. She shrugged, utterly unimpressed. He leaned in and taunted, "Is that really how someone begging for their life should sound?" Myungho ground his teeth and shot back, sarcasm sharp as glass. "Want me to start talking politely now that we're friends?" Jinyan lunged and seized him, and catapulted him across the room. Myungho hissed under his breath, disgust burning as he decided Jinyan had to be insane to still joke. And the twins barreled to his side, demanding to know if he'd really lost. Shame seared his chest as he choked out that he had. He barked, ordering them to shadow Jinyan from that moment on. He swore he'd be their big brother from that moment on. Tears threatened to spill, and Jinbo answered with a respectful nod. Myungho felt in his bones the twins would thrive with the Yunha merchant group, not rot away in this cesspit of a gambling den. One of the twins nodded so softly it was almost a whisper. Struck by the raw sincerity in his eyes, the other poured out thanks for everything. Myungho snapped his head up and blinked in stunned disbelief, then spat under his breath. Ungrateful bald bastards. Moments later, he stormed out of the building, still cursing, and spat. The elders were right. Never take in creatures with black hair. He sliced through the gambling hall as whispers clawed at his heels. Isn't that the walking corpse Cheol Myungho? Where are the twins who used to follow him? If they're gone, maybe we can finally beat him. The twins vanished. Gamblers swarmed in, circling him like hungry vultures. He let out a weary breath and hissed that the rats were finally crawling out of the woodwork, then slammed his voice into a roar. He snarled his identity, the venomous fox, and dared anyone with the guts to come at him. A thug snarled, "Dead man walking!" and screamed for the crowd to kill him. Hands shot to hilts and weapons flashed free. Myungho braced himself, teeth bared, muttering that this might be the end. After their last clash, he cursed Jinyanam, snarling that Jinyanam should have gone easier on him. Just as the mob lunged, Jinyan thundered in and cut them off. He unleashed a devastating blow that sent everyone tumbling out of the room. Jinyan sneered at the gamblers, mocking that not one of them had dared meet Myongho's gaze before, and now they swarmed like vultures because he was weak, and he told them to come back when Myongho wasn't half dead if they had any class. Myongho spat a grumble where a thank you should have been. Jinyan strutted like he was untouchable, flaunting a swagger that was begging for trouble. He hobbled off, grumbling that the world had gone to pieces. Jinyan and the twins burst out of the den. One of them stepped forward and poured out a raw, grateful thank you for the help, and the other instantly echoed it. Jinyan went silent at first, locking his gaze ahead as he muttered that anyone who'd set foot in this den, chances are they were burning with that exact question. What drove the twins to tail Jumyum? The streets buzzed. They'd been bought and sold like slaves. They fed themselves the lie that they feared him. Jinyan had once believed it, but the truth shattered his illusions. They were neither slaves nor cowards. A soft, knowing smile curled his lips as he murmured that even in his second life, unmasking people's true hearts never came easy. Far off, a lone figure tracked their every step. He narrowed his eyes into a razor-sharp squint. He froze, heart slamming, whispering to himself, "No way! That's really Jinyan!" A handful of days bled away after Jinyan rejoined the Yuna merchant group. Jaeon's mind was unraveling. No quiet day had survived since that guy returned, and just the other day Jinyan showed up out of nowhere with a mountain of cash. Without warning, he yanked two hulking men into the compound like stray puppies. John snarled that he didn't like him. Not one bit. Mid-rant, he snapped to a halt. What the hell was that? A massive carriage thundered into the compound. Hua Ion's calm voice sliced through the clatter as he warned the workers to handle it carefully. It carried something vital. Wide-eyed with curiosity, John barreled over and demanded, "What is it?" The moment he saw it, his vision blurred and his knees buckled. He nearly fainted. It was a 100-year tuber fleece flower, the exact thing people lined up for before sunrise. And he croaked, "Is this really that rare item?" Before Hua Ion could answer, a calm, iron-toned voice sliced the air. Their father declared he'd issued the order. Jaeon choked on his words. "Father." Hua Ion whipped his head to the old man, worry carved on his face as he warned it was far too early for him to be outside. But their father snapped back that he felt much better now. Jaeon's thoughts exploded. Why would father go this far? Lee Jinyon only asked for one elixir. Buying so many meant one thing. Jaeon had lit up. He swore there had to be one for him too. He spun to his father, hope trembling in his voice, but his father snuffed it out. Every last elixir went straight into Gideon's hands. Jaeon's jaw slammed open as father, unnervingly calm, announced, "All of them." One elixir couldn't save their family. Next to the fortunes they'd already burned on the Yu Yang clan and the Little Deity Sect. This was just a drop in the ocean. It wasn't excessive. He'd fired urgent letters to every branch leader, every longtime ally, and every top merchant, warning them they were in crisis. If the merchant group fell, they'd all lose money. He cranked up the pressure so they'd take it seriously. Father said he'd made Wu Young-hoo guard squad captain, so he stepped forward to shoulder the responsibility. Han-Yap nodded sharply and declared it a wise move. Jinyan was bound to become a great martial artist. Huion chimed in, calling Jinyan amazing, and their father thanked them both, saying he truly appreciated their support. Han-Yap vowed he'd pour every ounce he had into it. Jaeon sulked, and father silenced him. He crowed that this was perfect timing. A single, blazing chance to unleash every coin he'd earned his whole life. Panic clawed at Jaeon. What about him? Where was his elixir? Father pivoted to him, slow and cold, and demanded the answer. Would he ever truly require it? Later, the training ground exploded with energy. Frustration boils in Jolyon, driving him to train like a man possessed. Wherever he stepped, Ginny's name buzzed from every mouth. Ginny this, Ginny that. Why had they left him empty-handed? No elixir. Were they all turning their backs on him now? He spat a curse under his breath, stunned. What kind of damn miracle had Jinian stumbled into? From far off, he heard heavy footsteps thunder toward him. Jenny tore past him. He heaved forward with a fucking boulder lashed to his back. Jaehyun recoiled, stunned, and barked, "What the hell is that supposed to be?" Jinyan shot back, "I was just out for a walk." Jaeon snorted, disbelief blazing. Taking a fucking boulder for a walk? The guy born under a lucky star suddenly hurled himself into the grind. Jian crumpled to the ground. He clutched his wooden sword, muttering under his breath like a coiled storm. He strained to mimic the battle he'd watched between Jinyan and Ouyang-hu, flinging the same brutal strikes and razor-sharp feints. He staged it like a dramatic scene, unleashing full-throttle theatrics with every gesture. He pictured the moment Ouyang-hu's blade cleaved down and Jinny rocketed forward, and clocked him square in the jaw. His head was reeling. How had that bastard pulled it off? Right then, a voice sliced through the air. Jinyan had circled back, and he demanded, "Who are you calling a beastard?" Panic tore through Jaeon, his words choking into a frantic stutter. They sneered that he was only talking to himself, and Jinyan snapped, "If you're going to analyze movements, do it right." He slid the wooden sword into Jaeon's hands and grinned, praising him. His recreation of Wu Yang's sword form was rock solid. Jaeon froze as realization slammed into him. Jinyan had been watching. He seized Jinyan's instructions and ran the move back. Jinyan sneered, saying Wu Younghu's stab was embarrassingly sloppy. Jaeon snarled, spat a vicious insult, then bellowed that Jinyan had a... His tongue snapped like a razor. Before he could get another word out, Jinny lunged. Jinyan barely parried the blow, then snapped out a reply right after. Snapping out of the feint, he slammed the gap shut. Jaeon's thoughts careened out of control. What was this lunatic doing? Jinyan shot behind him like a shadow. He lashed out with another kick, but Jaeon twisted away at the last heartbeat. Jinyan growled that when a fighter is cornered, they unleash their hidden trump card. Just as Jae whipped around, Jinyan stood there, fist cocked, the strike skidding to a halt just short of his chin. Jaeon's whole body shook as the terrifying truth hit him. It could have killed him. Jinyan shrugged with a lazy smirk and tossed out that stabbing was far less precise. He slashed savagely and roared that the sword art Wu Young wielded was forged to kill in a single hit. If anyone could lunge in that split second, the outcome was sealed. Jinyan's mind plunged into the chilling possibility. Had that been him in a past life, Wu Younghu wouldn't even have had the chance to draw his sword. His body was barely a quarter of its old strength, and he forced himself to swallow any pride. Even crowned the Fist King, he slammed into fighters he couldn't beat. It wasn't enough. He had to shatter his limits and become far, far stronger. A servant barreled in, yelling that a guest was waiting for Jinyan. Neon snapped a nod, voice steady. "I'll be there soon." Then Kaji, they'd flick Jaehyun's forehead on the regular. Jaehyun yelped as pain exploded through him and snarled, "Why the hell did you hit me?" Jinyan smirked and taunted, "Because you're a damn bastard." Elsewhere, a bunch of guys erupted into a heated argument. One spat nonsense, swearing there was no way Jinyan knew martial arts. Wasn't that the guy who chased girls from dawn till dusk? Guong swore it was real. He'd seen it with his own eyes. One night, drunk, he careened past Chul Myung-ho's gambling den. A memory slammed into him. He'd heard a voice. It was Jinyan's. But when he spun around, Jinyan had vanished, gone without a trace. And back in the present, the others just scoffed, refusing to believe him. They'd all poured in to see it with their own eyes. They barred. He burst into Ginyan's room without knocking. Their breaths caught. Jinyan stood there shirtless, and the sight nailed them to the spot. Right there, shoulder to shoulder with the twin brothers. They slammed the door shut, sealing them inside as silence snaps into place. He spun to the servant, disbelief burning in his voice as he blurted, "Is that really our young master?" The servant bowed and nodded. "Yes. That's him." Sima Guk slurred that he'd drunk too much. Guong shook his head, disbelief blazing in his eyes. My jaw hit the floor. Was that really Li Ginyan? One of the notorious Playboy 4 Heavenly Kings? Then Jinny flung the door open. All three reeled back at once as Jinyan snapped at Myohyang to hustle the twins to the dining hall and pile enormous portions onto their plates. Myohyang snapped to the command and herded them away. Jinyan whirled to the three men and snapped, "Why are you still standing there?" He beckoned them inside. The three froze in place, their faces drained of all expression. Terror locked their thoughts into one desperate plea. "Someone, please save us." They swaggered as the self-proclaimed 4 heavenly kings of wine and women. Sima Guk, the Murim Alliance's hope. Jujariang, the man who'd failed his martial exams more times than he could count, and who nursed a forever sensitive stomach. Guong, the youngest heir of the West Wind escort household. And lastly, Li Jinyan, the infamous heir of the Unia merchant group. Together, these 4 made up the group. They reconvened, drawn by a wild rumor that their pushover friend Jinyan had returned, crowding the round table as gossip crackled between them. Jinyan groaned inwardly. Not these clowns again. Their faces seared into his memory. They were always hanging out, slamming drinks, and trading wild stories about women. They brazenly branded themselves the 4 Total Wrecks, a title so absurd it dared anyone not to laugh. Jujar Yang closed the gap, voice tight as he asked if he was all right. Jinyan answered with a single steady nod. Jaryong roared, "He's blazing with intensity, more alive than ever." Guong burst out, disbelief crackling in his voice. He still couldn't accept that the man he'd seen that night was Jinyan. Had he been training non-stop in secret? Sima Guk watched in silence, a cold certainty gnawing at his bones. This strength couldn't have come from training alone. This was martial arts unleashed, real, dangerous martial arts. Deadly, brutal, and built to end a fight. He barked for the name of Jinyan's teacher. No way he'd picked that up on his own. Jinyan shrugged it off as pure luck. Sima Goop gasped, proof this was one of those fate-shattering Jianghu encounters you only ever heard about. And Sima's next question was already leaping from his lips. Zhu Jiaryong cut in, crowing that Jinyan had finally caught a break. Jinyan looked so different Zhu could barely recognize him. Jinyan murmured, his voice dropping low. Death had claimed old Li Jinyan. The others froze in confusion as Zhu Jiaryong pressed him for his plan, and Jinyan shot back that he had Sect debts to pay. He'd joined the merchant group while he prepared, cared for nothing else, and only wanted to grow stronger. Silence crashed across the room as Guong leaned in and whispered, "What's wrong with you? Did we walk into the wrong house?" Zhu Jiaryong swore this wasn't him. A memory slammed into Simaguk, just a heartbeat before Jinyan walked away. He demanded to know if Jinyan would actually find somewhere to recover. Jinyan snapped that it felt more like exile. Their father must have been crushed by disappointment. Simaguk suggested it could be a lifeline, a chance to study, to heal, to reinvent himself. And Jinyan murmured that would be nice. "We're ripped back into the present." Simaguk hoisted his cup like a gauntlet. He slammed a hand on Jinyan's shoulder and bellowed, "Congrats! You've truly transformed." Zhu Jiaryong erupted into a grin and agreed. This moment demanded a celebration. Go-Oong cackled that he'd called it, gloating he'd been the one to suggest they kidnap Jinyan before they shipped him off. Simaguk taunted him that he hadn't even shown up that day. Gung shot back that he'd been busy. Simaguk rolled his eyes and jeered, "Busy taking a dump, maybe." Gung snapped, bristling and ready to argue. A faint smile flickered across Jin Young's face. Shock slammed into him. He had real friends after all. Then he swung his gaze to the others and asked, "He's changed, so what becomes of them?" A beat of silence cut through the air. Simaguk shrugged. Who knew? Zhu Jiaryong shot back with a grin. If they were the type to change easily, they wouldn't be themselves. Jin Young blew out a fed-up sigh and snapped, "Enough! Stop talking about it!" One thought burned inside Zhu Jiaryong's mind and refused to let go. Once, they all swore they were trapped in a well, but one of them had already vaulted out and laid eyes on the world. Time thundered on. Zhu Jiaryong whooped that he'd had a blast, then told Jinyan to call whenever he needed backup, and to train like hell so he wouldn't get beaten out there. And Simaguk congratulated him again. They bolted. I prowled the streets at night. Guong scoffed. It was bizarre. The biggest screw-up among them had returned as a grown man, and for a heartbeat it almost felt like their youth was over. Simaguk admitted he was gripped by an unusual loneliness tonight. "Let's go," someone urged. Zhu Jiaryong snapped. "Where to? A brothel?" Simaguk snapped. "Home, you idiot! Go study! You flunked your exam again, didn't you?" Zhu Jiaryong shot back that he wasn't bad at studying, but the truth was he tanked every test. Gung grinned and urged them to swing by Sweet Scent House for one more drink. They burst into the house, slammed by a rush of sweet-scented air. Elsewhere inside, Yom Jisang, leader of the Little Deity Sect, stood like a coiled storm. He slammed the table and unleashed a thunderous roar. Who's that fallen youth? Could the heir of the Unha merchant group really pack that much power? One of the Ouyang members confirmed it. Jinyan had shattered the captain in under 30 moves. Jisang demanded what weapon he'd used, and they answered bluntly. His fists. "Just saying," they sneered, and a bitter laugh ripped from their throat. The swordsman slashed like lightning. One brutal blow from the fist user shattered his guard and left him flat. "This reeks of disgrace!" An Ouyang member demanded. "What should we do? Do we take revenge?" Jisang's restraint shattered. How could they dare to exact revenge for a fair duel? They weren't thugs. The Ouyang members roared. "We're supposed to be friends." Honor bound them, fierce and unyielding. Jisang didn't hesitate. He sliced his head clean off. He spat venom in his voice. "I don't befriend corpses." "Haul that body out of here!" Surin, sitting beside him, went rigid as blood splattered across her face. Jisang's eyes snapped to her, startled. He cringed and apologized, admitting the drink tasted awful. "Now let's go." They pressed forward, every step a drumbeat. He hissed that the Unia merchant group had flat out refused to pay taxes, and now they'd murdered Ouyang Hu. What should they do with that? One of his men spat that it meant they didn't respect the Little Deity Sect anymore, and Jisang nodded, eyes cold with agreement. That was it. Exactly what he'd been looking for. He snapped his tongue into a sharp, satisfied click. A second lackey spat. Would he kill them? And Joseon froze. These weren't a gang. You don't just go around killing people. The lackey pressed the question again, snapping. "Are you seriously just going to let it go?" Right then, the trio, Goong, Zhu Jiaryong, and Simaguk, burst onto the scene. They strode into the establishment. They shot past the Little Deity Sect members the instant their paths crossed. Jay spat that he wanted the Unham merchant group's money, and Simaguk heard it and froze. Jay Sang pressed on. The Unha merchant group, old Li Xiangming, a deal-making legend, heard whispers that he was richer than anyone imagined. He burned to know exactly how much the young heir was worth. Sima Guk bolted out, sprinting full tilt back to the Yunha compound. And there, he finally spotted Jin Yun. Gasping, he blurted to him exactly what he'd heard. Jin Yun yawned and sneered it was touching. Then Sima Guk came sprinting back, shouting that the little deity sect looked ready to strike and they had no proper guards left. Should they turn to Guong for help? Jin Yun clenched his thoughts into silence. Siop's warning slammed into his memory. Mock. They tried to set them up with Ouyang Hu, he snapped, demanding to know where they were now. Sima Guk said they'd probably be back at their base. Jin Yun nodded and beckoned him inside. Sima Guk froze, confusion slamming into them. Where were they even going? Jin Yun thrust a folded uniform into his hands. They ordered him to strap it on as they stood in the guard squad's warehouse. He barked at Sima Guk. Do you know the way to the Sect's base? They had to be back before breakfast. Panic ripped through Sima Guk, and it was just the two of them right now. He fell to his knees, begging Jin Yun to reconsider, but Jin Yun turned away, cold and unmoved, so they had to strike first. He thrust a dagger into Sima Guk's hand. She barked, "Lead the way!" They burst out into the open air. A pint-sized deity commands a brazen sex base. Jin Yun's gaze swept the room, taking in every corner. A wall of guards blocked the approach. This had to be the place. Sima Guk breathed. I won't be any help. Jin Yun's head dipped in a sharp, decisive nod. He'd already finished his job. A cold truth snapped through Sima Guk. Hajit had to bring Jin Yun here. He snapped, "How are they getting in? What's the plan?" A small, knowing smile curled Jin Yun's lips as he snapped his leg up. He thundered a kick into the front door, ripping it wide open. He muttered to himself, "Let's pull this off the same way I did in my past life." Dan Wusung had charged headfirst into every fight, never once taking a step back. Not when he was a starving orphan, not once in all his long years roaming the Jianghu, and not even after he seized the throne as the Fist King. Everywhere Dan Wusung went, he hunted fights, grinning as chaos answered. He craved battle like oxygen. Fighting was his lifeblood. Reborn as Li Jinyan, he wore a new name but the same unshakable core. Jinyan strode through the little deity sect's gates without the slightest attempt to hide. Calm as a still lake, silent and fearless as he walked straight past the guards. Right in the courtyard's heart, he bellowed, "Where is the sect leader?" A guard exploded, screaming, "You're crazy," and cut him off before he could finish his sentence. Jin Young seized his throat and snapped his neck in one brutal motion. The body crashed to the ground with a crushing thud. Jin Yan's voice snapped like a whip as he warned them, "Don't make me repeat myself." Another guard cursed, stormed forward and yelled, "Do you even know where you are?" Did he think this was a joke? Right then, Yomji-sang, leader of the little deity sect, strode onto the balcony above. He glared down and barked, "What was that noise?" He zeroed in on Jinyan and demanded who the young man was. Jinyan growled that he was an assassin, and he fired off one more question. Was Jisung the sect leader? Jisung's smirk curled. So what if he was? But a cold twinge of doubt bit him. What kind of assassin strolls through the front door? His eyes narrowed as he scanned Jinyan's knuckles. His hands were caked in bruises and calluses. No pampering here. These couldn't belong to a spoiled heir. He snapped, "You're the young master of the Yunha merchant group?" And Jinyan shrugged, cool as a blade, thinking, "So what if I am? Maybe hiding my face was all for nothing." Jisung chuckled, amusement bubbling as he let slip he never expected someone so important to come to him first. Jinyan showed up alone, so he exploded into action. No restraint, ready to seize every advantage. A guard dangled through a net from above. Jinyan blurred sideways, effortlessly dodging the strike as it screamed past. He snatched the net out of midair. Its familiar weave yanked a buried memory into the light. He hadn't gone up against a force this huge in ages, and the memory of that past life clash with the demonic faction roared back. This body lacked his old strength, but it still packed enough punch, and he lashed it through the air like a lethal weapon. The guards crumpled, one after another. Jinyan grinned, sharp and certain. It had been ages since he'd felt a thrill like this. Screams ripped through the courtyard. One guard's voice cracked as he stammered that Jinyan was fighting barehanded. Someone else hissed, "He must be a monster." An arrow screamed through the air. A feather-light touch skimmed across Jinyan's face. The mask tumbled from his face and clattered to the floor. Irritation flared across Jinyan's face. Was the enemy just showing off? Jisung roared, his voice tearing through the room. He hated the idea of wasting that pricey weapon. But for Jinyan, a special guest, he relented and unsheathed it. Several guards lunged forward, seizing Jinyan's legs and pinning him in place. One of them felt his gut quake. At this rate, he'd be dead on the spot. Jisung snapped, "Even with Jinyan's skills, can he dodge this?" He bellowed, "Fire!" And his men answered with a thunder of bullets. Dozens of crossbows roared to life, rocketing a hail of air roads into the sky. Jinyan's eyes carved into icy slits as he realized Jae Seng would gladly burn his own men in the attack. treachery even the underworld would despise. A voice blasted from outside. Simaguk called out. He hurled the dagger skyward, the blade spinning like a silver comet. Jinyan snatched it. He snapped the blade into a lightning blur and knocked every arrow harmlessly aside. Every last spectator froze, faces locked and breath catching in their throats. Jae-sang's face twisted in shock. Disbelief clamped down. That ragged little dagger, so cheap, and Jinyan still parried every strike with it. Jinyan whipped around and he shot Simaguka a thumbs up, all swagger and steel. Then, without a single beat of hesitation, he flung the dagger blade singing straight at Jae-sang. It ripped a jagged gash across his neck. Just a graze, a razor-sharp warning to stay back. Jinyan confessed he almost never wielded a sword. He'd shred his rulebook for Jae-sang. Rage scalded Jae-sang as he spat that crazy bastard under his breath, then barked at his men. Why are they frozen like statues? Open fire already. Jinyan snapped back, his voice a blade of ice. His specialty was fists. He hurtled forward! I just blurted out, panicked. He lunged, yanking Saran in front of him and turning her into a living shield. Jinyan refused to slow. He twisted and slipped behind them, and not just mouthing away. Surin strode away unscathed, not a single scratch. Jinyan barked, "Move back!" Jo-song reeled, his thoughts tearing through his mind at breakneck speed. Who is this guy? If that's really the young master, how can he throw down like that? He passes for a veteran killer, not a merchant's son. Jinyan stormed forward and snapped, "What are you staring at, Ji-sung?" Was he actually going to say something? He begged, swearing he'd save a fortune. If Jinyan let him live, he'd throw down a fortune. He wouldn't skimp on a single coin. Jinyan exploded forward and drove a brutal kick straight into his face. He glared at the coins pouring from Ji-sung's clothes, then spat, "Why does a man like you prize money over human life?" He snatched up a few coins and flung them aside, scoffing, "I don't need them. Ji-sung can keep them." Then, Jinyan wasted no time. He rammed his fist through Ji-sung's chest, driving it straight into his heart. Everything froze. Silence crashed over the room as every eye locked onto them. Jinyan loomed over his lifeless body and spat, "Disgusting." Later, the sun finally burst over the horizon, ripping the night away. Jin-eon, Samajuk, and the escort lady staggered forward, bloodied and breathless, side by side after surviving a fierce battle. Samagyuk shot a sharp glance at Jin-eon, his voice faltering as he said, since Jin-eon was heading one way and he the other, he'd take over escorting the lady from there. Jin-eon nodded and entrusted her to him. Jin-eon turned and strode away, throwing a crisp wave over his shoulder as Samagyuk shot one back, and the escort lady sank into a deep, respectful bow. Samagyuk and the lady strode on together when she suddenly shattered the silence and spoke to him. She snapped, "Are you young Master Samagyuk?" Samagyuk recoiled and stopped dead in his tracks. He tore off his mask, whirled to her and demanded how she'd known his identity. The lady smiled, almost amused, saying she'd seen him again and again in Danhyong, and his close friendship with young Master Jin-eon made who he was obvious. Samagyuk gave a small nod and said he understood. She sank into a deep bow, poured out her thanks for everything he'd done that day, and vowed that if he ever returned, she'd serve him a bottle of top-grade rice wine. Samagyuk sneered at the offer, snapping it was unnecessary. He'd done nothing to deserve it, and swore he'd never set foot in the pleasure quarters again. The lady lifted her chin, a warm smile lighting her face, and declared that he had truly changed. Silence swallowed Samajuk for a beat. Then he murmured that he had to change too. His gaze pinned Ginny as she faded into the distance, and one sharp thought hammered through him. His friend. Everything had already shifted beyond recognition. So back at the estate, he tore off his old self and rebuilt who he had to be. The table groaned under a mountain of mouth-watering dishes, steam rising from every plate and daring you to dive in. The twins leaned over the spread, eyes blazing with hunger, as Jin-eon, fresh from the bath, stepped into the room behind them. He strode to the table, sat among them, and told them to dig in. The twins nodded and replied respectfully, and Jinyan pressed them on, insisting they not hold back and to eat whenever hunger struck. The twins shot each other a look and snapped their attention back to him. Jinbo grinned. That trading company is on another level. And Myungbo's eyes lit up. Do they let us eat 7 times a day? Jinyan shrugged and tossed back. Of course it would be. When one of the twins' eyes snagged on the healed cut across his cheek and they blurted, "Were you okay last night?" Jinyan stalled for a heartbeat, then shot back that he'd pulled it off, more or less. Inside, his thoughts sank under a crushing weight. He had to admit that, sudden as it was, a shock that shook him to his core would never have happened in his past life. To shield the merchant caravan with his own hands and face down magic wielders, he had to become far stronger. Training alone wouldn't cut it. He needed something beyond mere practice. A voice boomed from outside the room. "Delivery for him!" And Jin-eon froze, surprise exploding across his face as he blurted, "Is it really for me?" An attendant burst in, arms full of packages. Jin Aeon rifled through them, admitting he hadn't expected a thing, then ripped open a letter and plunged into the words. Gu Weng wrote that after they parted he popped into a tavern, sipped a single drink, then walked right back out, and he called that real progress. Jinian snorted as he read, sneering that this laughable spectacle deserved its own entry in martial history. He tore through the letter, which revealed that Gu Weng had shown up the day before with a package from Jinyan's father, but had forgotten to hand it over. Jinyan eased the box open and devoured the last lines. Gu Weng would leave the item with him on his way home, and once Jinyan grew stronger, he'd be tasked with watching over their escort agency. Jinyan's eyes snapped to a rare prize in the box. The instant his gaze landed, his mind knew. Century Root. It screamed 400 or 500 years old, and with a streak of luck it could blast his White Lightning 10-stage art straight to the 5th level. A faint smile tugged at his lips as realization crashed over him. This was what having a true friend felt like. Then his eyes snapped to another box, perched there like a dare, waiting for him. He ripped open the attached letter and read that it was from the Tejo Trading Company, sent a lavish gift to honor the long-standing trust between their families. And Jin Aeon, knowing Tejo was one of the Central Plains' wealthiest firms, felt a cold certainty that his father had even gone to them for help. He blinked, stunned. He hadn't expected this much thought and care. When he opened the box, his eyes snapped wide, shock ripping through him. Inside, pure voidstone milk filled the space. Recognition slammed into him like a lightning bolt. This was a miraculous elixir most martial artists only dared to dream of finding. Only the 1,000-year spirit fruit, moon elixir flower, and 10,000-year snow ginseng could rival it, and he forced himself to admit it. This was real, pure voidstone milk. Something he'd only ever tasted a few precious drops of even in his past life. He gaped, disbelief roaring. How could a mere merchant snatch something even powerful martial artists struggled to lay hands on? Jin Aeon roared at the twins, ordering each to seize a Century Root. He announced he was about to circulate his chi, barked at them to guard his room, and warned them to wait to eat until he was finished. Jinbo's gaze snapped to the root, and he burst out asking what it was. Jin Aeon said it heals the body, is rare, and must not be lost. Jinbo's eyes narrowed. Disbelief coiled behind his stare. He yanked open a nearby door to reveal a storage room heaving with treasures, then smirked and said the merchant chief had stacked pile after pile of the same loot just for Jin Aeon. Jin Aeon froze, eyes wide, then a brutal realization slammed into him. That money wielded terrifying power, bending people and fate to its will. 2 hours thundered by. Jinyan plunges into a satin-smooth meditation, every breath honing his senses into razor focus. After devouring the rare herbs, energy surged through his veins. The taste hit him, bitter and utterly devoid of aroma. It mirrored martial arts training, relentless, exacting, unforgiving. Pain lanced through him, and at first it felt like nothing had come of it. Then, without warning, heat exploded through his body. He realized that if he were still the old Jin Aeon, his body would have already liquefied. Luckily, he'd strengthened it beforehand. Then agony exploded inside him, consuming every thought. A blistering inferno ripped through him, as if his body had burst into flames. Each time he forced it down, the inferno within flared up, burning hotter and wilder. He clenched his jaw and swore, if that was the case, he'd push harder than ever. He detonated, an explosive surge of energy that rattled the entire room. At last the chaos ebbed and stillness crept in. At last, calm swept back in. He flexed his energy and probed the clay. His fist snapped shut, determination like wildfire. He'd reached the 5th stage. He grumbled under his breath about his body's ruined state, the toxins still reeking of alcohol. He whispered a cold goodbye to the smoking husk of the old Jin Aeon, squared his shoulders, and faced the true challenge looming ahead. His eyes locked onto the bottle of pure voidstone milk. He snatched it in a heartbeat. He pictured absorbing the elixir as dumping water into sand, molding it into a fragile bowl, then hurling it into a furnace, almost guaranteed to crack. He steeled himself, convinced that if he endured, he'd emerge stronger than ever. Inside his mind, chaos erupted. He was slammed by the voidstone milk's spiritual energy, a wild current racing through his veins. Doubt gnawed at his gut. Was it testing him? He swallowed his pride and admitted he might have let greed steer him. He swore that if he conquered it, he'd explode into even greater strength than... 7 days snapped past as Hua Eon planted himself outside Jinyan's quarters at the estate. Exactly 1 week after Jinyan first set his energy flowing, he had to admit the worry knotting his stomach. The twins greeted him politely as he arrived. He snapped, "Any sign of him?" They shook their heads and said he'd ordered them not to let anyone near. Hua Eon scowled, forced a nod and said he understood, worry still burning in his eyes. Suddenly, a thunderous smash blasted from the room, and a ferocious gale tore out, rattling the whole area. The twins hurled themselves between Hua Yan and the oncoming force, taking the blow. Stunned, he demanded, "What's happening?" All eyes snapped back to the room. Jinyan hovered in midair. Hua Ayan's voice tore toward him, disbelief clawing at every syllable, but his eyes exploded into an eerie, unnatural light. A foul stench slammed into the air. Hua Ayan yanked a hand to his nose as realization exploded in his head. The scent was unmistakable. Chi deviation. Jinny slammed to the floor as the twins and Huai burst through the door. Huayan bellowed his name and crashed to his knees beside him. She crumpled to her knees, voice raw as she begged him to come to his senses. Jinyan stayed planted on his knees, lungs burning as ragged gasps tore from him. Huayan darted to Jinyan's side, worry burning in his voice as he whispered, "Are you all right?" Jinyan let his gaze crawl toward him. He snapped back to his feet, lips clamped shut. He strode to the door. When Huayan snapped again, demanding where he was going, Jinyan finally answered in a low, clipped voice that the heat was unbearable. He had to cool off, and they were not to follow him. Jinyan hurled himself into the night, rocketing across the roof until his silhouette sailed past the estate wall and vanished. Left behind in the chamber, the twins shot uneasy glances at Huayan as he muttered, bewildered. The air felt oddly cool that day, yet Jin Ayan had claimed he was burning up. Jinny streaked across the rooftops, launching herself from roof to roof. Panic clawed at his mind, his thoughts spiraling into a frantic storm. Every inch of him blazed like a living inferno. His current body's immature vessel raged against the... A tsunami of raw power surged through him, roaring like a caged beast, desperate to break free. It seethed like a caged volcano, primed to explode, and he knew he couldn't let himself snap here. His power threatened to pulverize the Yunha merchant group, and could tear the whole street into rubble. He swore to get as far away as he could, hurling himself forward in frantic, desperate leaps eventually. He burst onto a jagged, rock-strewn mountain slope and, at last, it slammed to a halt. Lightning ripped through him, jagged arcs snapping along his limbs as the voice in his head trembled, screaming urgent warnings. He faced the truth. He couldn't keep it bottled up anymore, so he ripped the lid off and let it explode out. He thrust his right arm skyward. Jinny planted herself on Roard. Lightning detonated from his body in a colossal burst, slamming into the mountainside with a blinding, shattering force. From a nearby ridge, several travelers froze, nailed to the spot as awe stole their voices. They stared, mouths open, as bolts of lightning ripped up from the ground and stabbed the sky. The heavens ripped open and rain slammed down as Jinyan stood frozen in the heart of the storm, soaked to the bone in ragged clothes. He mouthed the count, testing his ability, and a breathy 6 slipped from his lips. A triumphant surge flooded him as he realized he could unleash that energy at full force. His white lightning 10-stage art surged into its 8th form. Later, the city was pounded by a torrential downpour, the streets ripped into roaring rivers. Jinyan glided down the center of the road with unnerving calm, his tattered clothes clinging to his body and drawing stunned, confused stares. Passers-by leaned in, whispers snapping as they gaped at a half-naked man wandering the city in the downpour. Several women locked onto him, their eyes blown wide and blazing with desire. A faint smile ghosted across Jinyan's face as he decided to hunt down some proper clothes. Smack in the middle of a clothing shop, he locked onto an outfit and declared to the vendor, "I'll take it." I asked the price. The vendor whipped his head back and insisted we didn't have to pay. Surprised, Jin Ayan insisted. But the vendor grinned and said that ever since Jin Ayan had delivered a brutal lesson to the Gu clan's thugs and the lesser immortal Sect, trouble around here had all but vanished. Relief crashed over him. He could finally bring his children to the shop in peace. He smiled and declared that repaying that favor was a blessing. And Jinyan caught sight of 2 children peeking timidly from the side of the shop. The vendor insisted he take an umbrella. The rain still lashed down. Then bashful children shuffled forward and pressed it into his hands. Jinyan flashed a gentle smile and declared, "I'll gladly take it." He stepped outside, snapping his umbrella open. The vendor and his children waved, shouting their goodbyes. Jinyan barreled down the crowded street. Blades slid into the crowd, swallowed by the surging tide of people. His inner voice swallowed the stillness. This place truly felt calmer. It hit him. He'd never watched the aftermath. The violence fell silent, and peace and safety flooded back as people laughed, shopped, and lived on beneath the looming storm. He closed his eyes and smiled as a warm calm bloomed in him, realizing he might actually enjoy this rare, quiet walk. Shouts snapped him out of his reflection, as someone barked for the crowd to clear a path, and howled for others to grab the man sprinting away. Jinyan's gaze snapped to the commotion. He went stone still the instant he recognized the figure being chased. There he was, Chao Myung-ho, and the fugitive's gaze snapped to him too. Chao Myung-ho slid up to his side with a grin like they'd been friends forever, greeted him casually, and noted the rain hammering down. Jinyan let out a long, weary breath and snapped, "You sure live a hectic life." Cut to the Moyong clan estate. A secret council of lords converged in the hall. Doko Myong beamed, calling the council's unity a welcome sight, and singling out Mo Young-bin for nailing the meeting preparations. Mo Young-bin bowed and brushed it off as nothing, then leaned in and murmured he'd heard about a tragic incident. Whispers said, rumor screamed that Gu Yong-hu had dared a merchant heir to a duel and paid with his life. He demanded, is it true? The Gu patriarch dropped his gaze and swallowed his words, answering nothing. Whispers rippled through the council as they hissed that the Gu family, once the clan's most seasoned warriors, had been disgraced when Gu Yang-hu made a spectacle at the merchant guild and lost his life. A thunderous laugh exploded through the hall. Nam Gung-woo, the Blade Emperor, cackled that being bested by a mere merchant brat was more entertaining than any clown show. Laughter exploded from him as Gu Hyung-sang trembled with rage at the sting of humiliation, and Doko Myung, trapped between them, awkwardly chimed in. Gu Yong-sang snapped his head up and declared, cold as frost, that Gu Yong-hu was already effectively cut loose from the clan, and he vowed to make it official. The merchant brat froze as the Gu family unleashed their true, terrifying power. Back in the rain-soaked street, the pursuers chasing Cheo Myung-ho skidded to a stop before Jinyeon. One of them barked, hand over the fugitive, and the others snarled that he should keep his nose out unless he wanted to get hurt. Jinyeon pivoted toward Myung-ho and snapped, who are those men? Myung-ho's bitter smirk twisted as he spat that they were underworld thugs, calling themselves the Red Reaper Alliance, who'd been running wild and trying to seize control of the entire region. He dropped the bomb that he'd once run an auction house, but when he raced back to square the books, he realized the Alliance had already seized it. To him, they were nothing but a ruthless pack of bandits. Jin Young's eyes snapped to Myung-ho's hand. Fully healed? He asked. Myung-ho cracked a crooked smile, hoisted both hands and admitted they were still useless. Jin-yoon then surged forward. He jabbed a finger at the bandits and snarled that since they weren't locals, he'd put it plainly. Come back only when Cheo Myung-ho's hand had healed. Until then, get lost. The bandits exploded into mocking laughter, jeering at him, sneering and asking if he'd been coddled all his life, warning him he had no clue how the world worked, taunting him while pretending to dismiss his presence. A cold unease slithered through their ranks. A nameless intimidation slammed into them, pinning them beneath a crushing weight. Rage boiled in one man as he stormed forward, roaring that Jin Aeon must want to die and jabbing a finger straight at him. His colleague lunged to stop him, warning him not to be rash, but the bandit ignored the warning. He sneered, spat, "Do you know who you're speaking to?" and snapped, "Who do you think you are ordering us around?" before he could finish his threat. Jinian flicked his forehead, his finger biting down with a sharp snap. A thunderous strike catapulted the man backward. Jinian's chilling voice sliced the air, every word slow and crystal clear as he declared he was starving right then. If they dared fight, he'd cut them down without a second thought. He urged them to flee while he still offered mercy, swearing they'd meet again. Either Cheo Myung-ho would be there, or he would. They all dropped into a perfect synchronized bow, fear carved into every face, and cried out as one for him to leave unharmed. Jinyan offered a quiet, clipped nod. The group bolted into the driving rain while Myung-ho flicked a mocking wave over their shoulders. He whirled to Jin Aeon, grin blazing, and demanded Jin Aeon buy him food, insisting he was hungry too and that a bowl of noodles would be enough. Then they strode off together. Myung-ho boomed in his trademark dramatic tone, reminding Jin Aeon that on the day they first met, it wasn't Jin Aeon's beating that nearly killed him, but a ravenous hunger. And he ranted that since ancient times the people of the Central Plains draw strength from food, so Jin Aeon should have fed him before tending to his injuries. Jin Aeon sighed, annoyed, and shot back, "You could have just asked, you crazy bastard." Myung-ho exploded into laughter and shouted, "Let's hit Jin Pyong for noodles!" Later at the restaurant, the two slid into a booth and dug in together. Myung-ho exhaled a satisfied sigh, declared, "I finally feel alive," then grinned and called out Jinyun's ravenous appetite. He taunted him, asking if he'd established a beggar's sect inside his stomach, then pointed out that Jinyan, who once nibbled at his food sparingly, now ate ravenously, and declared a person should not change so drastically, but should live naturally, flowing with life. He beckoned the server over and snapped for more food, roaring for 2 bowls, then flipping his order to demand 4 more. He snapped the conversation sideways and asked, "What about the twins?" Jinyun barked at him. "We're training!" Myung-ho chuckled, sure they'd grown stronger by now. He sneered that their food bill must be astronomical, dubbing them hungry demons. Jinyun waved it off, boasting he was swimming in cash. Myung-ho laughed and snapped back that he'd put in his share too. Out of nowhere, he yanked the conversation and fired, "How does one learn proper martial arts?" Jin Aeon cocked his head and shot back, "Why the sudden interest?" Myung-ho leaned in, desperation raw, and begged to know if he could F***G. If he trained, he'd stare down the Red Reaper himself. Janae snapped the paws off, chomped his food, and asked if Myongho sought him out to learn from him. Myongho feigned humility, bowing theatrically with a sly grin, and declared he'd be grateful if Janaeon agreed. Jin Ion locked eyes and asked if he'd obey his teachings. Myongho threw back his shoulders, reintroduced himself proudly as the Venom Fox, and boasted he'd obey. Jineon jabbed a finger at the floor and barked, "Bow!" Myongho clawed at the back of his head, his cheeks blazing with embarrassment, and muttered, "This is humiliating." At last, a raw groan ripped from him as he sank to the floor and pressed his forehead to the ground. He glared at Jinyon and demanded he keep his word, or he might drag the Unham merchant group's main gate through the mud. Stone-faced, not a single word escaping him. Jinyon snatched the umbrella at his side, whipped it in a sharp arc, flashed a precise move, then jabbed a finger at it. He barked at Myongho to mirror the example. Myongho gaped, disbelief clawing at his throat, and snapped, "Is that all?" Jin Aeon shot back, his voice flat as steel. "What else did you expect?" Rage boiled in Myongho as he sprang to his feet and roared that he'd even bowed. If Jin Aeon wasn't serious, he'd make a mess of the restaurant. Jinny whacked him sharply on the head with her umbrella and barked for him to be quiet. He dared him to hold the umbrella with a single hand, and he rattled off the motion he'd been shown 100,000 times. Myongho's jaw dropped, shock slamming into him. Shaking, he choked out the impossible. Not 1,000, not 10,000. It would take 100,000 repetitions. Jinion's gaze sharpened to a blade as he barked, "If the Venom Fox really grew a tongue that long, drop the umbrella and leave." Myongho's voice cracked with disbelief. "Are you serious?" The air turned leaden. Jinion yanked him by the collar, and his glare cut like a blade, eyes narrowed to slits, and he hissed again. Did Myongho really think childish tricks alone could kill someone? Had he swung that umbrella 100,000 times, it would have turned him into a killing whirlwind, cleaving through half of those bandits with nothing but a wooden sword. Instead, he bolted, drenched to the bone like a soaked rat. Jin Aeon's voice froze. He snarled at him, "If you're going to live like a coward, you might as well die." For a heartbeat, Myongho fell silent. Then a faint smirk curled his lips as he muttered that he didn't want to kill anyone. Jinion's gaze hardened to ice as he barked, "Are you a rat?" The Venom Fox spat a razor warning at him. "Know your place and shut your trap." The two sat like statues while rain pounded the silence, eyes fixed on the window as people blurred past on the slick streets. At last the rain relented and sunlight tore through the clouds. Myongho hoisted himself upright, measured and determined, and asked to borrow the umbrella for a while. He didn't wait for anyone's permission. He stormed out of the restaurant. A servant stepped forward, bowed politely, and asked Jinyon to cover his friend's bill too. Jinyon slid his hand into his pocket, and the attendant broke into a grateful smile, abandoned, swallowed by silence. Jinyon clenched his jaw. Now they'd just have to wait and see if that fool Myongho could finally pull himself together. Myongho's vow to face the Red Reaper, the Alliance's leader, ignited in his mind. Jinyon crossed his arms, hissed, "Red Reaper Alliance," and vowed he'd come find them. A promise was iron. Elsewhere, in a shadowed chamber, a man brooded before two lifeless bodies as several of his followers dropped to their knees before him. Their heads hung low, quivering with fear. No one dared meet his gaze. He snapped like a steel blade, ice lacing his voice as he demanded their excuse for letting Chaol Myung-ho slip away. They swore they'd nearly seized him, but one of Daok Jong-ho's friends intervened, and, their voices shaking, they revealed that friend was the young master of the merchant group. One of the bandits choked out that it was true, insisting Jinion's martial arts were terrifyingly strong, and gasped that word was already spreading, people calling him the fiercest man in the entire Yanghua region. His gaze slitted into knives. The bandit flinched. Ice threaded his voice as he barked, "Jan Ion and Cheol Myung-ho, prepare! Hunt them down and end them." Later, Jin Aeon tore through training while one twin leaned in and warned that Jiok Ye was notorious for a savage, explosive temper. He reveled in tearing his enemies limb from limb with his bare arms, then recounted how the leaders of Jongsan's Blossom Sect, Jioki, annihilated the Dugard Guild, the Flood Dragon Guild, and the Crimson Treasure Sect, then devoured the neighboring sects around Yuquan until he'd forged a colossal army. His grip tightened so fierce that all of Yuquan paid him tribute. Escort agencies, merchant guilds, inns, even brothels. The twin sneered. Even Chaol Myung-ho was coerced into offering him tribute. Jinyon scoffed that he'd heard Myung-ho had lost his entire auction house to Jiokye just the day before. And the twin nodded, grinning. That's exactly the kind of man Jiokye was. Jinny slid to the sidelines and grudgingly admitted Jiyoshie was a total nuisance. If anyone uncovered his true identity, everything would spiral into chaos. he figured he'd have to strike first. Zhongru towered in Yuquan's bustling district, the house of warm affection. Inside, warmth wraps around every corner like a familiar, heart-thudding hug. She barked at an attendant to sprint and see if the guests had cleared out. Moments later, a piercing scream ripped through the house. Startled, she bolted toward its source and demanded to know what had happened. A woman nearby trembled and stammered that someone had entered Lord Jiochi's room. CLE was still inside. Panic slammed into the group. An employee barreled up to Zhenghua with news that a guest had arrived downstairs. Zhenghua sprang to greet them, ordered the others to carry the shaken girl away to rest, and snapped, "Never disturb Lord Jiochi. Keep everything quiet." Downstairs, Zhenghua bounded across the room toward the new guest, a grin lighting his face. John Aeon introduced herself and launched into a polite explanation. Then Jinyan sliced through the moment and demanded, "Is Jiochie here?" Zhenghua froze, voice cracking as he blurted, "You mean the guildmaster? Do I have an appointment with him?" Jinyan snapped, voice like ice, denying it. He only wanted to know if Jiochi was upstairs. Zhenghua froze, doubt snapping at his resolve. Her gaze snapped to the bandits nearby, doubt clawing at her. Should she reveal the truth to this stranger? After a tense pause, she finally admitted it. Jiochi was there. Jin Aeon cut past her without a second thought, shouting, "Get the girls out!" as he sprinted up the stairs. Clarity slammed into Yonghua. She finally grasped what was happening. Memory slammed into him. One of the girls was still inside Jiochia's room. She lunged at Jinian, screaming a desperate warning. The guildmaster was a powder keg of a man with a short fuse. Jinian flashed a grin and vowed he'd handle it. Jinny shot up the stairs. One bandit zeroed in on him and barked that he had no right to wander into that area. Gneon sauntered past with a lazy swagger, not even sparing him a glance. The bandit jabbed his spear at Jinian, jeering as if Jinian had crammed candy into his mouth, never breaking his stride. Jinian lunged, snatched the spear, and his grip snapped shut like a steel trap. Whipped it skyward and hurled the bandit, smashing him into the fucking ground. First floor. The other bandits snapped to attention, alarm surging through them. They snarled, "Do you even know where you are, Jinian?" as they coiled to strike. Jinian kept his hands clasped behind his back, cold menace dripping from his voice while his composure never cracked. He snapped, "Which floor is Joki on?" Bandits exploded into a bloodthirsty frenzy, blades whipping as they screamed for his death, while hundreds of guards thundered down from the upper floors to confront him. Jinian scoffed. Crackling lightning arced from his palm as he muttered he'd tear through every room until he found Joki. It barreled into the first band. Jinian clamped a hand over his head and declared, "I'll borrow your body for a moment." Jin Aeon smashed the man into the earth, then detonated a crackling lightning field that blasted everyone else skyward. Another bandit lashed out, his heavy flail cutting the air straight at him. Jin Aeon spotted it in a heartbeat and darted out of the way. He ripped the weapon from the attacker and roared he'd take it himself. With one, he launched a devastating swing and smashed the man's face, and ripped straight through the wall. Jinian swept his gaze over the wreckage and muttered, "This isn't the right room." He launched himself off the railing. He whirled the flail, debating if he had to batter through every room. Without hesitation, he launched himself forward and slammed the weapon into the nearest door, plowed forward like a freight train, shattering walls and felling every book. It slammed into his path. After he tore the floor apart in a frantic search, he let the weapon clatter to the floor, brushed the dust from his hands and sneered, "There's nothing here," and Jiochier had to be waiting on the next floor. Up in the chamber above, Jiochi sprawled across the bed, utterly at ease. In an instant the door slammed wide open. Two of his guards were flung through the entrance, crumpling inside, broken and groaning. Another bandit howled in alarm, jabbing a finger at Jin Aeon and roaring, "That's the young master!" Gineon strode in. He slammed another bandit's head into the dirt. Then, voice like ice, declared he'd found his target. "G-okay." Ye's grin widened as recognition snapped into place. "Jin Aeon, here to settle my Youngho's debt?" he taunted. Jin Aeon snapped. The fifth floor had been the right answer. He'd insisted the climb was insane. Then the sight below slammed into him, the lower levels carpeted with the bodies of countless bandits. Jiochai hauled himself to his feet, sneering as he snapped at Jinian. "Didn't like the welcome party? Was the climb too difficult for you?" Jinian snapped, "Doesn't matter. Climbing over others has always been my specialty." Jiochier loomed over him, dwarfing him with an overwhelming, hulking presence. He dropped down, locked eyes with a wide grin, and crowed that his specialty was staring down everyone from on high. He shot upright, slicked his hair back, and flashed a cocky grin. A wicked smirk curled Jinyan's lips. He relished Black Path bastards like Jioki. They were always pure fun to hit. His eyes darted to the bed. He burst into the room and froze. A hostess lay there, utterly lifeless. Jakir tracked the gaze and grinned, shrugging it off like it was nothing as power boiled in his veins. and he snapped for the body to be dragged away. Jinion's face blackened into a scowl. He growled that Gyoki was beyond saving. His aura erupted. Killing intent slammed into the chamber. Ice laced his voice as he asked how to kill Gyoki. Gyoki curled his lips into a hard grin and said he liked those eyes. The same merciless look he'd seen on the faces of the people who once tried to kill him. In the end, he crowed, boasting he'd ripped them all apart with his own hands. Outside, the district erupted into chaos as terrified employees and bandits bolted from the building, screams ripping through the air. One man burst in, breath ragged, demanding to know what was happening. A bandit snarled back that some lunatic was tearing the entire brothel apart. A masked figure lashed his umbrella in a razor arc and snarled at the panicked bandit to flee while he still could. He let a single number slip under his breath, 2,874. And the bandit went rigid with confusion, stammering, "What are you talking about?" The masked man lunged once more, driving the umbrella down into the bandit's skull. He yanked off his mask. Cheol Myung-ho's face snapped into view. Rage tore from Myung-ho as he snarled he'd crush them one by one, spitting, "You're all sons of bitches!" He lashed the umbrella through the air, counting out loud, 2,875, 2,876. He snarled that at this snail's pace he'd never reach the 10,000 swings he'd been tasked with. A thunderous blast ripped through the brothel's rooftop and rattled the entire district. Myung-ho slammed into stillness, shock knotting his words as he stammered, "What in the world was that noise?" Meanwhile, on the rooftop, Gyoshie's footing gave out and he was catapulted into the air. Jinyon dove from above without hesitation, unleashed a mid-air strike, then smashed both hands down with brutal force. He slammed Gyoki down into the dirt outside the brothel. Jinyon slammed down like a lightning bolt, his face a frozen mask, instantly surrounded by bandits. His gaze drilled into Gyoki as Gyoki slowly hauled himself up from the ground. Gyoki snapped the dust from his clothes. He straightened, a smirk curving his lips, and declared, "Now this is getting interesting." Jinyon stripped off his outer clothes in one sharp, decisive motion. Gyoshie barked for a weapon, and one of his men leapt forward, slamming a heavy flail into his waiting hands. He lashed it in a savage arc, primed for battle, and roared that Jinyon, at the very least, deserved a proper fight. Gyoki ripped the weapon through the air. Jinyon hurled himself forward. The flail hurtled straight at him. Jinyon plucked it from the air like it weighed nothing, and a savage yank dragged with crushing force. Shock slammed into Gyochi. His eyes flew wide as he fought to resist. He sneered, "How could a mere merchant's young master match my strength?" Resolve snapped into place. He readied to counter. He snapped his grip free and channeled the rebound's raw force into Jineon, aiming to crush him instead. He rocketed forward like a cannonball, shredding the air. He roared at Jinny, urging her to try and block the next attack. Jinyon barely blinked, tracking Gyoshie's flow and thinking to himself that the man had been schooled in meteor hammer and fist techniques. Every move razor clean, shouting the discipline of a true orthodox martial artist. Jineon's jaw clenched, his expression cooling into iron. He clenched his jaw and forced himself to remember. His opponent was not He squared off against a plain, ordinary man, except that man was the Fist King. Jinyon unleashed a bone-shattering punch that slammed straight into Gyoki's body. A raw groan ripped from Gyoshie as pain shot through him and he staggered backward. Jinny leapt back, cool and calculating as she sized him up, while Gyoshie, shaken but defiant, forced out a nervous laugh. He grudgingly conceded that Jin-an was a master of fist techniques too. He roared he'd give him a proper fight. Then Gyoki's body erupted in a titanic surge of energy, shredding his upper garments into dust. Rage exploded inside him as he launched himself forward. He snapped into existence right in front of Jinyon, roaring he'd tear him to pieces. Then his fist froze before it could strike. Jinyon's hand lashed out, locking around Gyoki's neck as his face hardened into a stern glare. A genie storms onto Slam Joke 8 and drops a show-stopping punchline. He slammed him into the dirt, crushing him beneath a ruthless, unrelenting grip. Sweat sluiced down Gyoki's face as he gritted his teeth, horror ripping through him as, despite pouring every ounce of himself, a sudden, crushing wave overwhelmed him without warning. Jinny snatched his face into her hands. Lightning crackled across his body as a mocking smirk curled his lips and he snarled, "How does it feel being the one staring up from below?" He slammed his knee into Gyakia's neck, driving him flat and pinning him harder. His voice sank to a low growl as he snapped that if Gyoshie had shown even a scrap of decency to others, he wouldn't be seething like this. Gyoshie roared with laughter, taunting him, then sneered, "Jinyon, want a taste of seal too?" Jinyon's expression blackened, his voice dropping to ice as he snapped, "The punishment begins." Lightning ripped through Gyoki, his screams shredding the air, as Jinyon's voice stayed icy and measured while he counted and cranked the lightning's power up. Second stage, Third stage. Fourth stage. The curtain rises. Fifth stage erupts. The ground bucked beneath them as the surrounding bandits stared, eyes wide with terror. One of them choked out that they should stop this, their voices trembling with fear. A hand shot up, finger stabbing at the sky. Their eyes shot wide as something loomed high above them. A titanic hand of pure lightning ripped into being in the sky. The white lightning 10-stage art. Jinyun's voice rolled like thunder. A deafening clap tore the air, and he hoisted his arm sky high before driving it down. A titanic surge of energy slammed down, engulfing the entire brothel in searing, blinding light. When the glare finally faded, bandits, employees, and civilians across the district stood frozen, shock etched into their faces. Jeoshie lay obliterated, nothing left but a black smear of ash staining the ground. Jinyun's gaze went ice-cold while an inner voice roared that this was nothing less than the purge of the dark path. He roared, his voice slamming into the trembling bandits and forcing them to listen. He slammed his fist down and demanded to know who they thought they were. He bled the powerless for tribute, then sneered at them and demanded, "What are you supposed to represent?" He locked his gaze on one and demanded, "Why are you siphoning the lifeblood from ordinary people?" His voice sharpened, slicing through the air as he commanded them to answer. Silence slammed into the clearing. The bandits stood petrified, terror clamping their throats so not a single reply escaped. Jin Aeon's voice plunged into menace as he warned them that if all they sought was to flaunt their strength, they should come to him first. Then he slammed a commanding roar down on them and vowed he'd make them end up just like Joki. One bandit lunged forward, frantically trying to rally the others and yelling they mustn't be afraid, insisting it was only one man before ordering them to kill him. The crowd's whispers ignited as shock rippled through them and the truth slammed home. The infamous Red Reaper lay dead. One onlooker gaped in awe, asking who that young man could be. Another cried out if this meant no more tribute, while someone else fretted the young man might simply. They shoved Jiokya into the center and demanded payment. And in the crowd, Cheol Myungho stood watching. He slid his mask back on with unnerving calm, his voice steady and low as he assured them not to worry. This young man wasn't the sort to demand tribute, and the bystanders blinked, bewildered, doubting his certainty. Cheol Myungho shot a decisive thumbs up and, voice like iron, repeated that Jinyun would never exploit anyone. His wealth overflowed. He had no need for such things. Cheol Myungho lashed his umbrella in a relentless rhythm, counting each strike with fierce resolve. He watched, heart hammering, as Jin Aeon tore through the remaining bandits. Resolve hardened in his chest as he realized every person carried a stubborn spark burning within their heart. Reality slammed into him. Every person had to tend that spark themselves. And now he understood. Jin Aeon craved strength so fiercely he'd burn his own sanity to cinders chasing power. Cheol Myungho felt Jinyun's words slam into his mind. "Are you a rat or the venom fox? Know your place." His eyes snapped wide as he exploded into a shout, correcting himself with fierce conviction. "Hold up, I'm the venom fox." Later that day, at the Yunam Merchant Group, Jinyun strode back and slipped into his room. He froze. His older brother Hua Yan was already there. Jinyan whispered, "Brother." And Hua Yan, who had been reading in the room, snapped his head up with worry carved across his face and demanded, "Where have you been?" Jinyan blocked the doorway, crimson staining his body, and shrugged, tossing out that he'd only gone for a drink before coolly asking what had brought Hua Yun to his room. Hua Yan, rattled, jabbed at the blood and demanded why his brother was in that state. An attendant swept in with a rug, and Jinyan shrugged coldly, saying the blood wasn't his. Hua Yan shot back dryly that he could see that much already. As Jinyan wiped the blood from his body, Hua Yan noted the elixirs were working, confessed he'd been planning a thank you gift for those who sent the medicine to the Yunha Merchant Group, agonized over what to offer Merchant Taeho of the Taeho Merchant Group. Father was even curious, and then asked if the medicine was really that precious. A bolt of understanding shot through Jinyun. The Taeho Merchant Group were the ones who'd supplied the azurite essence. He confessed aloud. He couldn't even begin to gauge its worth. Hua Yan gaped and demanded again if it could truly be worth that much, his mind scrambling for what they could possibly offer in return. Jin Yan snapped back, voice like iron, that repaying with money or goods would not be appropriate. What they'd received was priceless. Hua Yan asked, "What should we do?" And Jinyan cut in, his voice razor-sharp and absolute. He tossed out a plan to form a merchant's alliance, and his brother froze, echoing the words in stunned disbelief. Jin Yan revealed the elixirs flowed from mighty merchant houses like Tai Ho, and even from smaller outfits like the West Wind Escort Establishment, which had no defense force of its own. He vowed they'd forge an alliance and shield everyone. That would be repayment enough. Hua Yan faltered, voice catching, and asked if such a plan was too ambitious. Jinyan barked. There was no need to go grand. Just include the Taejo Merchant Group and the West Wind Escort Establishment for now. They'd been given something money couldn't repay, so they'd return the favor in another way. And Hua Yuan asked about rules or membership fees. Jinyan slammed his fist and roared that the rules must stay as stripped down as the ancestors left them. And for now, no fees would be collected. Curiosity crackled in Huayan's voice as he asked, "What's the purpose of this alliance?" And Jinyan froze. Faces of everyone he'd met on his walk flashed through his mind. Then a firm answer sliced through the silence. "The purpose," he said, his voice slamming into the silence. "Their sworn duty, shield merchants and keep them alive. It would also unleash a lightning-fast network for instant communication, so they could pounce on problems the instant they appeared." Huayan nodded, then shot a sharper question. What would they do if something rose up that even the Taejo Merchant Group's escort warriors couldn't handle? Jinyan's chest tightened. If that happened again, it meant the merchant groups were deeply involved. Especially if that happened, I'd be dragged into the Jianghu underworld and forced to clash with those who lurk there. He knew exactly what he had to do, and declared with iron resolve, "I'll go myself." Huayan snapped back, alarmed and shouting if his brother truly meant to involve himself. And Jinyan reminded him he'd already said the medicine they'd been given was priceless, and had granted him tremendous strength. Huayan demanded if it really made him stronger, and Jinyan answered simply that it had. Huayuan, electric with excitement, slammed his fist on the table and roared. "What do we call this alliance?" he blurted. "Let's call it the Great Merchants Association." Jinyan scowled as the Crimson Reaper Alliance flashed through his mind and snapped they should call it the Great Merchants Association. Drop alliance. That word grated on him. Huayan nodded to the decision and vowed to prepare. At the door he pivoted, looked back, and said that ever since Jinyan returned, his workload had only swelled. He let out a weary sigh, and confessed he was drowning in work lately. Jinyan met his eyes and whispered an apology. Huayan flashed a wide grin and brushed it off. "It's fine," he said. For merchants, being busy was always a good thing. Jinyan scoffed at his brother's words, but before they could continue, the exchange died on their tongues. Outside, a thunderous voice roared for young Master Jinyan and the chief administrator. A guard barreled through the door, wild-eyed and shouting, "We're finished!" as both brothers spun toward him, bewildered. Huayan fixed the guard with a cold glare and demanded to know what had been done. Out of breath and pale with fear, he screamed again that they were finished. Lord Ouyang himself had arrived with his disciples. The instant Ouyang's name hit the air, Huayang went stone still and Jinyang's eyes narrowed into lethal slits. Moments later, inside the cavernous main hall of the Unha merchant group, Patriarch Ouyang, Sang of the Ouyang clan, planted himself and drank deeply. He brought his cup crashing down onto the table. The memory of his clan's humiliation at the ruler's meeting exploded into a blinding white-hot rage inside him. He roared that just remembering it set his blood ablaze, spun to his 3 disciples and ordered each to take on Jinyan of Unha Trading, warning a single victory wouldn't restore their pride. Ice laced his voice as he ordered that Jinyan must never be allowed to die in peace, then barked, "Do you understand?" The 3 disciples answered as one, shouting, "Yes, one of them!" Related to the Ouyang clan by marriage, Shin Sobek fired a sharp question at the others. "Who's taking weapons?" Then scoffed and declared he fought barehanded, so their blades meant nothing to him. Ouyang Miang, the clan's second son, cracked his knuckles and grinned that he'd rather let his fists do the talking because they felt better. And Ouyang Woon, the third son, swallowed his fear and admitted he lacked the confidence, so he'd stick to his blade. Ouyang Miang's glare seethed with disgust as he snarled that his brother lacked the nerve to face a mere merchant's son. Ouyang Woon shot back, pointing out Jinyan had defeated Ouyang Hu, and even if Ouyang Hu was only a distant relative, he was still a seasoned man of the Jiang Hu. Ouyang Myong's eyes narrowed to slits as he sneered, dismissing the claim outright. Ouyang Hu lost for one reason. He simply lacked the skill. He waved for another drink, spat that there was no need for more chatter, then barked for Jinyan to be brought out at once. The Unha merchant group's twin attendants strode over and announced to the clan that the young master had invited them to the annex, saying he'd join them there as soon as he finished his meal. Ouyang Myong recoiled at their sight and choked out a shaky, "Yes," whispering to himself in stunned disbelief. Why are Jinyan's servants so massive? The twins flanked the Ouyang clan, shepherding them straight to the Enix. They ripped the curtain open and one of them thundered, "I've brought the guests!" Jinyan planted his feet dead center in the arena. With icy calm, he bound bandages around his hands, looked up to welcome them, and admitted they'd come a long way. One by one, the disciples dropped into deep bows and proclaimed their names. Jinyan smirked, disbelief crackling in his voice as he said the patriarch had shown up in person. Ouyang dipped his head, a sly smirk curling his lips, and announced he'd crashed in unannounced just to see Jin Young's strength with his own eyes. Jin Yan declared with iron confidence they'd come for a duel and would choose the format, and Ouyang Sang shot back that his son sought to learn from him through the fight. He laid out the rules in no uncertain terms. Leave the ring, blackout, or become immobile. Any of those means defeat. Jin Yan scoffed, a razor smile slicing across his face, declared the rules simple and good, then barked that they should begin. The second son, Ouyang Myung, strode into the arena as silence slammed down on the crowd. Perched in his seat, Ouyang Sang slitted his eyes and a savage grin spread across his face as he waited to see the merchant's son beg for his life. In the arena, Ouyang Myung narrowed his eyes into a razor focus, poised to strike, but a cold, uncanny prickle crawled up his spine. He kept it to himself. He admitted it. He wasn't facing a merchant's son. He was staring down a warrior forged and hardened in the Jianghu. Doubt clawed at him. Was Jin Yan's victory over Ouyang Hu nothing but a lucky fluke? Just as the duel was about to erupt, Jin Yan shot his hand into the air and asked Ouyang Myung to keep his sword sheathed. Ouyang Myung shot back that he'd do as he pleased, and it wasn't Jin Yang's business. Before the sentence left his mouth, Jin Yang lunged across the gap and drove a fist into his face. Ouyang Myung's body rocketed across the arena like a cannonball, tearing through the air. It barreled into the annex wall. His brothers and fellow disciples froze solid, breath stolen and disbelief pinning them to the spot. Across the room, Patriarch Ouyang Sang crushed his cup beneath his fist as fury tore through him. He watched one of his sons crumple from a single strike, then fixed Jin Yan with a glare that burned with fury. Standing dead center in the arena with unnerving calm, Jin Young fixed Ouyang Myung with a cold stare and said he should have drawn his sword. Confidence blazing, he roared for the next challenger to step forward. From the sidelines, the third son Ouyang Woon strode forward, declared he'd be the next, and begged young Master Shin to watch his brother. Shin's Obek at his side nodded. He understood. Ouyang sprang up, unsheathed his blade and faced Jin Young, declaring Jin Young's skill meant no holding back, and that he welcomed a true fight. Jin Young gave a slight nod, agreed, and told him to begin. Ouyang dropped into his fighting stance, narrowed his eyes. He bellowed his intent to strike. In a flash, he lunged, swinging his sword in a brutal arc at Jin Yan. Jin Yan planted himself like iron as his opponent closed in. At the last moment, Jin Yan braced, unmoving as the foe barreled forward. At the last moment, Jin Yan steadied himself, still as his opponent closed in. Jin Yan darted aside with lethal grace, silently appraising Ouyang Woon and admitting the man was fearless and born for the blade. But he knew boldness alone wouldn't win this fight. He raised his arm with surgical precision. Ouyang Woon's eyes snapped wide in shock. A stunned mutter escaped him, disbelief raw in his voice as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. His jaw dropped as Jin Yan caught and slammed aside his sword strikes with bare hands. Blades and limbs slammed together while disbelief roared through Ouyang Woon's mind. It slammed into him. Jin Yan wasn't merely deciphering the flow of his blade. He intercepted every strike without a weapon, using only his bare hands. Jin Yan yanked his fist back in an instant and he hissed to himself about calling the fifth phase while only channeling the energy of the third. Ouyang Woon froze. He froze as lightning chi snaked around Jin Yan's fist. He planted his feet and hoisted his blade in a desperate guard. But Jin Yan poured everything into the white lightning 10-phase art lightning roar. Thunder split the air as the blow crashed down on Ouyang Woon and crushed him beneath its might. He crumpled to the earth as darkness slammed into him, snuffing him out in an instant. From the sidelines, Patriarch Ouyang Sayang stared at the duel's result in pin-drop silence, his face carved hard as obsidian and utterly unreadable. The disciples reeled, stunned, as Shin Sobek barked in disbelief. Even the third young master had been toppled with terrifying ease. Still planted on the floor, Ouyang Myung turned to Shin and urged them to call off the sparring, warning that if all three were defeated, it would ignite a massive uproar. Shin went silent for a beat, then snapped one cold word. No. Shin Sobek didn't hesitate. He sprang forward, stormed into the center of the arena. Excitement crackled across his face as he proclaimed the eldest young master an excellent martial artist. Trained in palm strikes, he seized the moment, dropped into a fighting stance, locked eyes with Jin Yan and demanded a spar. Shock jolted Jin Yan for a heartbeat when he realized his own reaction. He snapped into his own stance moments later. He couldn't deny it in his gut. Shin Sobek looked respectably skilled. A smirk split his face, and fired with excitement, he accepted, agreeing to the duel. Both men exploded forward in the same heartbeat. Their attacks crashed with bone-rattling force, exhilaration burning on their faces as Shin Sobek surged in with raptor palm strikes, relentless and aggressive, while Jin Yan blocked every blow with smooth, flawless precision. After a blistering flurry of exchanges, Shin froze mid-step, just a single heartbeat of hesitation. A wicked smirk curled his lips as he goaded Jinyan, sneering. "You're only going to block?" He whirled sharply, bellowed the technique's name, and unleashed the whirling wheel-crushing palm strike, his body tearing the air into a tornado as he lunged at his opponent. Jinyan calmly sidesteps the incoming strike, unfazed as it whooshes past. A grin curled on his lips as he conceded Shin's moves weren't terrible, then sneered that they were far too exaggerated, and in the next instant, Jinyan snatched Shin's foot and an iron grip clamped down, unyielding. Shin howled at the top of his lungs as searing pain ripped through him, his grip staying iron tight. Jinyan cracked a grin and declared it a brilliant duel, bowing with respect as he greeted him. "Young Master Shin." He slammed Shinso, sending him crashing back to the ground. He crumpled to the ground, every last ounce of strength drained, unable to fight on. From the sidelines, Ouyang Niang spat under his breath after watching his comrade collapse, bitterly snarling. What glory's left in a duel when the opponent's already beaten? At the arena's center, Jin Yan let a ragged sigh rip from him and clutched the back of his neck. He eased his gaze toward Patriarch Ouyang's words, every inch deliberate and electric. They demanded to know why the Lord still seethed, displeasure coiling in his gaze even though the duel was over. Ouyang Sayang trembled, rage roiling in his veins as humiliation clawed through his every thought. He staggered in disbelief. The merchant group's young master had crushed them, victory after victory. Reality hit him like a punch. Jinyan wasn't ordinary, and he admitted to himself that hauling in another Ouyang wouldn't change a thing. Fury surged as he pictured the Rulers' Association's pride crushed, and them mocked without end. The Patriarch let out a long, bone-deep sigh, swallowed the fury burning in his chest, and beckoned Jinyan to walk with him. Not long after, the two of them glided down the streets, moving with easy, carefree steps. Ouyang Sang swept his gaze across the peaceful town and declared the Unham merchant group must have a whole network of suppliers tucked away here. Then he slammed to a stop. He turned to Jinyan, smirked, and said straight up, "Join the Rulers' Association, not the whole Unha merchant group, just you. Join as an individual martial artist, and they'll shield your group." Jinyan whispered the organization's name under his breath, then sank into a deep, silent reflection. A cold truth slammed into him. The association was forged by the four great clans, Dako, Shimen, Namgoang, and Moyong, deliberately excluding the Tang clan, and in reality, they were nothing more than those who'd broken away from the Miram alliance. Jinyan spat the accusation aloud. They'd broken away because the Miram alliance revolved around the great sects. Ouyang Sang conceded it, and fired back asking if that was a problem, insisting it was just a group in friendly competition with the Miram alliance. Jinyan muttered he'd heard the Ouyang clan had only recently joined, and suddenly he understood why the Patriarch was so obsessed with saving face. The Patriarch snapped that his former followers had been spreading Jinyan's name everywhere, and those whispers had ruined his reputation. He planted a hand on Jinyan's shoulder and insisted he never meant to lay blame. His face snapped into a knife edge. He glared and demanded Jinyan join the association to restore his honor, insisting it was an easy favor, while he secretly plotted the only move left: bring the Unha merchant group's eldest young master under his wing and make Jinyan look beneath him. Jinyan fell silent for a long beat, then demanded, "What happens if I refuse?" Yang Sayang snapped. "Why would you even think of refusing?" He scoffed. Jinyan had nothing to lose, and the scion of that merchant dynasty wouldn't waste a second tallying gains and losses. Jinyan snapped, demanding what use a merchant faction would be to the association, snarling that he wasn't short on coin, and they were offering nothing more than the seat of an ordinary martial artist. He ripped his gaze from the Patriarch, turned his back and stalked off, shouting that if this wasn't a fight, their conversation fell away, and he snapped with a voice of ice. That walk was not enjoyable. As Jinyan surged ahead, the gap yawned wide. Ouyang Sayang's voice sliced the air as he gave one last chance, cold and merciless, asking if Jinyan wanted to watch the entire Onhum merchant group slaughtered, warning that the Onyang clan could spare Jinyan alone but brand him the martial world's public enemy, then flashing a vicious grin as he dared Jinyan to think they couldn't do it. Ouyang Sang stormed up to Jinyan, clamped a hand on his shoulder and drove his words like blows, demanding whether Jinyan had the strength to stop him, daring him to make the Rulers' Association his enemy, asking why he spurned his goodwill. Before he could finish, Jinyan spun and seized Ouyang Sang by the throat. He slammed him against the wall, rage ripping through his voice as he roared for him to stop the nonsense. He spat, "You insane bastard! Have you considered I could kill you here and now and wipe the Ogang clan out entirely?" He even tried to pin the blame on his eldest son, then fixed the Patriarch with a lethal glare and dared him to test him. Gasping for air, Ouyang Sang rasped that of all the vile words he'd ever heard, Jinyan's were the most unforgettable, accusing him of having no manners, no restraint, no shame. Then he roared that those words should be saved until after Jinyan proved his strength. Boom! Green smoke erupted, instantly filling the air. Ouyang's grin split his face as pride surged. This was the Poison Toad Palm Strike, the technique he'd hammered into himself to defeat the leaders of the 4 great clans. A cold doubt burned in him. Could Jinyan withstand it, even at his strongest? He hadn't even begun to savor his advantage when a jagged crack of electricity ripped through his ears, and his eyes snapped wide in shock. Lightning ripped through the air and wrapped Jinyan from head to toe in crackling, roaring arcs. Dread slammed into him as he watched his poison blister and burn away, lightning ravenously consuming every trace. A ragged groan tore from him as he thrashed and kicked at empty air, Jinyan's hands cinching around his throat while he choked and gasped for breath. Finally, he was hurled to the ground, crashing hard into the dirt. He hacked and spat, fighting to draw breath as Jinyan towered over him with icy disdain, snarling that he should reckon with how high and mighty he'd acted. His strength proved disappointingly weak, and inwardly Jinyan figured it was because his White Lightning 10-phase art had already reached the 8th phase. Sprawled on the ground, Ouyang grinned through the pain and roared, "If Jinyan's going to kill me, do it right here," he snarled. "Even if I die, they'll just brand Jinyan a public enemy. And when the Rulers' Association stands behind him, what will you do? Who will truly lose in the end?" Jinyan crouched, grabbed him by the head, leveled a predator's glare, spat a single word, his name, like poison, and vowed he'd make him regret those words for the rest of his life. Later that day, inside the Uni-Merchant Group's main hall, the air simmered with restless energy. Attendants hunched over, frantically bandaging the Ouyang clan disciples' wounds when the doors slammed open and Jinyan burst in, dragging Patriarch Ouyang's sign by his hair. Terror exploded from the disciples as they wailed, pleading for their patriarch and father. Ouyang Myong shot to his feet and bellowed, demanding to know what Jinyong was doing. Jinyon zeroed his gaze on them, snapped his fingers, and snarled that they'd better stay silent or they'd end up like Ouyang. From the back, Ouyang Woon's voice tore free, strained and breaking, as he asked if his father still drew breath. Jinyan let the patriarch crash to the ground, stalked forward and hissed, "I live, for now," then barked to Mak Inshop to ready a carriage outside, and him Siap snapped into a bow to acknowledge the order. Ouyang Woon cut in again, his voice slamming down as he demanded Jinyan had to have a valid reason for those actions. Jinyan shot back a grin. He swore Ouyang Sang had threatened him. Don't cooperate and they'll obliterate the entire Unya merchant group and frame Jinyan as the culprit. Shock ripped through the disciples, freezing their voices mid-breath. Jinyan vowed to drag this straight to the Rulers' Association and report it in person, then barked for the guards to tail him and stand as witnesses. Shin Sabayuk slipped inside, heart racing, and reminded him, voice trembling, that the Rulers' Association had no official headquarters. They gathered at the 4 clan patriarchs' homes. He flagged the Mo Yang estate as the nearest, and Jinyan nodded once before barking new orders. He barked orders to the guards and the twins, shadow the disciples and stamp out any reckless move before it even begins. He barked at Huayan to marshal the day's events and send the report to the Mu Rim Alliance. Then in a voice of iron he gave the final order. They would head to the Mu Yang clan, and later they set out. Inside the carriage, Jinyan perched by the window, a soft hum curling from his lips to himself. After drifting through a fog, Ouyang Xian's eyes finally snapped open as consciousness rushed back. He croaked, his voice a frayed whisper, asking where they were headed. Jinyan shot back, "We're headed straight for the Moyang clan." Oyen signed inside and he whirled to one of his guards and snapped, "I'm parched! Bring me water!" The guard shot an uneasy glance at Jinyan and muttered, he didn't think they'd ever get permission. A low, knowing chuckle escaped Jinyan. He planted a heavy hand on the guard's head and snapped that the clan patriarch himself was asking for water. Yet the guard dared to retort with an icy sneer. He lunged forward, hands clamped on the guard's head and hissed, his voice a frozen blade slicing the silence. He snarled that he wasn't an Ouyang clan warrior at all and snapped, "Are you an assassin?" Before the man could even open his mouth, Jinyan blasted a jagged spear of lightning chi that struck the man, electrocuting him instantly and snuffing out his life. Outside, the coachman howled in alarm, demanding to know what was happening, and Jinyan barked at him to keep the coach moving and not to worry. He locked a razor gaze on the guards beside Ouyang Seyang and demanded if he, too, was a hired killer. The man froze, then choked out that he belonged to the Gold-Silver Assassins, a force split into gold and silver ranks, and that he was in the silver division. Jinyan spat the name like poison, mocking the obsession with money. He spun to Ouyang Seyang and demanded, "How much did you pay to hire men like these?" The patriarch bristled and asked why he was so interested, and Jinyan snarled, darkly reminding him he still had many body parts intact. He barked at the coachman to halt the carriage for a moment, and Ouyang Sang shot back that he'd already paid 800 noyang per head. Jinyan whirled to the assassin and asked if that was true. The assassin nodded, trembling, whispering that it was even worse than usual. Jinyan snapped that he was wrong, then slammed the truth down. Those 800 nangyam even counted his own life, and their leader had already sold them out to Ouyang. Once the Yunha merchant group fell, their killers would be silenced next, snuffed out to bury every trace. Rage boiled in his voice as he vowed he'd sooner butcher assassins than swallow the clan's scorn for dirty deeds. He snarled that this was the so-called orthodox faction's way, pristine on the surface. Grime clung to him as Jinyan smirked and pinned his gaze on the terrified assassin, snarling that his life was worth no more than 800 nangan, a pittance, and that if he'd trained harder he wouldn't have been sold so cheaply, then ripped into him mercilessly, calling pay-for-death killers less than human. He slammed his palms together once, a single sharp clap that split the silence. Jinyan sneered, driving the mockery home as she declared they'd led a so-called grand life. He leaned back and snarled, "Outside, 3 more assassins, 1 badly wounded, and 1 corpse." He sneered, voice like ice. Perfect group for a stroll. At last they reached the Moyang clan estate. Jinyan, Ouyang Sang, and the guards stormed onto the grounds, unleashing a ripple of stunned whispers through the onlookers. Whispers shredded the air. Was the man being dragged really the Ouyang clan patriarch? Who was the young man at his side, and what had reduced the patriarch to such a broken sight? One lone figure surged forward. Moyongbin, patriarch of the Moyong clan, snapped Ouyang Sang's name and demanded to know what had brought him here and why his neck looked like that. He spun to Jinyan, admitting he'd never met him and tossing out his name. Jinyan answered, "I'm Jinyan, young master of the Yuna merchant group." Surprise exploded inside him. He'd been sure the Moyang patriarch would be Moyang Chu, not Moyang Bin. Moyang Bin locked eyes on Ouyang Sang and demanded, "Why did the eldest son of the Uni merchant group arrive dragging me like a criminal?" Ouyang Sang turned his head away and said nothing. Jinyan stepped in, his voice slicing the air as he declared he'd tell the story himself. He finished his account and slammed down his verdict. Ouyang Sang personally hired the assassins. A wave of shocked murmurs crashed through the hall. One of the men beside Moyang Bin hissed that threatening a merchant group was a grave crime, warned the Maram alliance would laugh if word leaked, and urged they silence the matter. Moyang Bin cut him off with a raised hand and brushed his words aside. He locked eyes with Jinyan and fired his words straight at him. They snapped, "Did you come here to expose the truth because you were afraid they'd retaliate?" Jinyan's eyes narrowed to slits, and a smirk curled on his lips as he shot back, "Moyang Bin, what would you have done if you were in the same position?" Moyang Bin chewed on the thought in silence. If anyone dared threaten to slaughter his clan and brand him a criminal, there was only one verdict: kill him. If that someone was Ouyang Sang, he'd have to face not just the Ouyang clan's wrath, but the judgment of the entire martial world. His thoughts slammed to a halt as Ouyang Sang hacked, coughed, and muttered bitterly. He howled in fury, stunned and ashamed that he'd been defeated by a merchant group's child. He roared that if the other patriarchs hadn't sneered at him in the association, none of this would have happened. He owned his mistake, but slammed their mockery as the force that drove him to it. His voice cracked with desperation as he begged them not to hesitate, promising he'd do anything for help. Mo Yongbin stepped forward, unnervingly calm, warning that any more disgrace would shame the man and drag Mo Yongbin down too. Then his hand shot out, slamming into the back of Yul Yongsayang's neck and knocking him cold. He barked to his attendants, "Seize the 3 assassins, lock them away, and keep them alive under unblinking watch." Mo Yangbin spun back to Jin Yan, a faint smirk curling as he apologized. Their hospitality had been shameful. The Rulers' Association had no business harboring leeches, and Jin Yan had paid the price. Then he invited him to stay for a meal if he wasn't leaving at once. Jin Yan dipped his head, accepted with a steady nod, and declared every step of his journey had been worth it. That night the two sat together and hungrily tore into their meal. Mo Yangbin locked onto Jin Yan, breathless. The Yuna merchant group's eldest son had just toppled the Ouyang patriarch, and he quietly wondered where a man like that had come from. He locked eyes with Jin Yan and demanded, "Have you considered how this should be resolved?" He conceded he couldn't kill Ouyang himself but vowed to handle it sensibly. When Jin Yan pressed for a plan, Mo Yangbin revealed he intended to deliver Ouyang Sang. He coldly chose to scapegoat the Mruvan alliance, steering the Ouyang clan's resentment onto them instead of the Rulers' Association. He roared that the association would take a brutal hit, but honor mattered more and the other patriarchs would agree, and Jin Yan acknowledged it as a sound plan. He planted his chopsticks on the table. Jin Yan blurted a question at the worst possible moment. Had the former patriarch Mo Yong-chu undergone the Golden Basin hand-washing ceremony? The question hit like a punch. Mo Yongbin stopped dead, eyes wide and hands trembling. After a tense pause, he admitted Jinyan's knowledge of the Zhonghu was outdated. Then his voice went raw as he revealed his father had been missing for over a year. Thunder ripped the silence outside like a war drum. Jinyan's voice shattered into a stunned whisper. "He's missing." Mo Yangbin pressed on, revealing that the entire main clan had scoured the land for him and come up empty, and that he lived under the disgrace of being branded an unfilial son. Jin Yong took the blow in silence. Realization slammed him. He'd slipped into this body just a year ago, which meant his original self had already died. Mo Yong-chu showed up too. He demanded, "Were there rumors that Mo Yong-chu had clashed with the demonic faction?" Shock jolted Mo Yongbin. He froze as his mind honed into a blade of intense, probing thought. He warned the demonic faction had slumbered in silence for over 20 years, if they'd even risen at all. The entire martial world was already ablaze with the news, so it defied logic they'd hunt only his father. A grim shadow crossed Jinyan's face as memories slammed in. He'd been blindsided, ambushed with no warning. He hurled the question at Mo Yongbin. If several swordsmen had attacked his father, how would he have fared? Mo Yongbin dropped his head and conceded it would have been brutal, but insisted his father wouldn't have fallen to just a few swordsmen. And Jinyan leaned in, pressing the killer question. What if they all had blade-proof bodies? Alarm exploded across Mo Yongbin's face, snapping his suspicion into cold, undeniable certainty. Jinyan plunged back into the memories of his past life. Memory slammed into him. Some foes he'd fought survived even ninth phase strikes from his lightning energy. Even now, locked in his own flesh, the 8th phase would obliterate ordinary men, an unnatural force. And he knew those foes had at least reached the blade-proof body, maybe farther. If such warriors, fueled by eerie sorcery, united, only beings beyond the heavens could stand against them. Silently he seethed, questions burning. Why did the demonic faction prowl the shadows? Why hide? What were they truly after? Far away on a mountain plateau, a cloaked figure, umbrella in hand, slipped into a cave. Inside, the man leaned in and addressed another figure who sat cleaning his sword. He snarled, "They've finally found you, the Sword King." The man known as the Sword Demon curled a razor grin, exulted at the news, and snapped, "Heavenly Demon," at the cloaked figure. He roared, snapping his followers to attention and bellowing, "Prepare yourselves! It's time to hunt the king!" Back at the Moyong clan estate, tension crackled through the halls. Jinyan sat beside Mo Yongbin, leaning in and demanding the latest on the other martial masters. Mo Yongbin paused, jaw tight as he weighed the question, then announced he'd seen the Blade Emperor only recently, and the Emperor was hale and hearty. He recounted a meeting where Ouyang Sang exploded, demanding to know if they were mocking him, but the booming laugh actually came from the Blade Emperor. The others stiffened into awkward expressions as the air crackled with tension, and Mo Yongbin conceded the Ouyang Patriarch had every right to be offended. The Blade Emperor wouldn't spare a second for anyone he despised. He erased them from his world without a single glance. Mo Yongbin said the Sword God had locked himself away for closed-door training 6 months ago, and he asked aloud, what kind of martial skill could a man already famed as beyond the heavens still be honing? The Sword Emperor roamed with no permanent home, impossible to pin down. When he last showed himself, they'd told him Mo Yang-chu had vanished, and since then, there'd been only silence. The Sword King had half-retired, sheathing part of his life to spend his days forging disciples. Mo Yongbin spat out the name Fist King like a dare. He painted him as a living storm, so fierce his own father couldn't handle him. No word had come in, and he figured the Fist King was roaming the world, hunting disciples or tearing underworld sects to pieces. People rarely befriended him. He stood behind an iron gate that kept everyone at arm's length. Jinyan set his cup down with a decisive thud and demanded to know what kind of man the Fist King was. What exactly made him so hard to approach? Mo Yongbin's eyes snapped wide. He couldn't believe Jinyan was still in the dark, so he barreled into a sharp, urgent explanation. The Fist King pummeled junior disciples of the Orthodox factions at the first hint of arrogance. Whenever elders from the rogue factions displeased him, he'd pummel them into the dirt. He carved a bloody path through the demonic faction, slaughtering every member he encountered. He brazenly slapped several young heirs, even those from the great clans, like it meant nothing. Mo Yongbin thundered that the Fist King was a man of iron principles who never broke his word. He barreled up to the seniors and dared them to duel, not a second's hesitation. To Mo Yongbin, every fiber of him screamed martial artist. From his father's accounts, he seemed to drift through a life hollowed out by loneliness. Jinyan muttered to himself as realization struck. Maybe the Fist King wasn't as lonely as he seemed. Mo Yongbin demanded what he'd just said, and Jin Young instantly dodged the question. blurting that the food was delicious. Moments later, Jin Yong bolted upright. Mo Yongbin asked if he was planning to return to the merchant group. Jin Yong confirmed he would. And Mo Yongbin suggested that if he had no immediate duties, he should pack his bags and head straight to the Miram Alliance to meet them face to face. The next day, outside the Moyong clan estate, Jin Yon and his companions readied to leave as Mo Yongbin insisted that if Jin Yon testified in person, they could swing the case their way, noting the clan's delegation was returning from a nearby assignment, and it would be best for Jinyon to travel with them. He slammed his palm down and announced Baek Hankyong of the Muram Alliance. Baek Hankyong dipped into a slight bow and declared his name. Mo Yung declared Oh Young-se Yang would be escorted separately, and cleared Jin Yon and Baek Hankyong to slip away first using mobility arts. Jung Yuan agreed, then hurled one last request at Mo Yongbin. Look after the Yunam merchant group while I'm gone. Mo Yongbin flashed a steady grin, and announced the Moyong clan's martial artists were already on the move, escorting the merchant caravan. Jung Yuan flashed a grin, dropped into a deep bow, and swore he'd never forget the patriarch's goodwill. He slammed down another demand and dropped the bomb. The assassins who had attacked earlier. He'd once marched under the banner of the Gold-Silver Assassins. He ordered the Rulers' Association to investigate them, and swore he'd throw his strength into the fight the moment their headquarters were uncovered. Mo Yongbin nodded, saying it would be easy. Jinyon owned up without hesitation. He'd come ready for an all-out showdown with the Moyong clan. After outsmarting the crisis with cool precision, the patriarch strode home, his conscience finally at peace. He offered a heartfelt thanks, then strode off alongside Baek Hankyong. They catapulted forward, charging headlong into their journey. Mo Yongbin shut his eyes and muttered under his breath. The Una merchant group's eldest son had really come alone, ready for battle. Riveted, he realized this was the most fascinating man he'd ever met. 4 days thundered past. Jinyan and Baek Hankyong burst into the new town, shoulder to shoulder, striding down the very center of the bustling street. Baek Hankyong stared him down in absolute silence, and a sharp truth clicked. Jinyan kept the same stone-faced quiet as he did. After several days of travel, silence thickened between them. They only snapped curt commands like, "Let's depart. Let's hit pause and catch our breath." A jolt ripped him from his thoughts as he accidentally collided with a man, and Baek Hankyong shot out a quick apology. But his gaze snagged on the jagged scar slicing across the man's left cheek. He let out a sharp hiss, "Wicked rogue," and his gut dropped when he realized he'd just locked eyes with a man from the Muram Alliance's most wanted list. He roared he'd either kill him or drag him in alive. Jinyon murmured from the side, asking if the man belonged to the unorthodox faction. Baek Hankyong vaulted onto the nearby wall, shouted that he was fine, then barked to Jinyun that it was too dangerous and to stay back. He tore across rooftop after rooftop, hunting the wanted man, who spotted him and bolted. He roared for everyone to clear a path as he plowed through the crowd. Baek Hankyong's gaze snapped to him as he bolted. The clatter gave him away. He was fleeing loudly. He remembered how many outcasts of the unorthodox faction, furious over the Miram Alliance's recent moves, began hunting, capturing, and slaughtering its members. He paraded through the streets, maskless and brazen, a walking neon sign that screamed suspicion. He slammed to the ground, squared up to the rogue, and cold realization hit. He'd walked into a trap. Sure enough, 2 more men flanked the wanted criminal. Baek Hankyong leaned in, eyes snapping to the empty spaces. Both of them were missing arms. A punch of realization hit him. They'd been beaten by the Alliance leader before. He barreled in, yelling if they were even alive, shredding them for squandering the moment with cowardly tricks instead of challenging the leader, and called them out for dangling wanted criminals as bait. They grinned and boasted their pastime was lopping off arms for the Alliance leader, while another crowed that they loved boxing up the severed heads of his subordinates and sending them to him. A voice cleaved the air behind them. Jin Yan materialized without a sound, smirking as he taunted, "Is that really your idea of a hobby?" The 3 criminals whipped around, shock blazing in their eyes as they screamed, "Who's there?" From the front, Baek Hankyong went rigid, astonished. He couldn't fathom when Jinyon had closed the gap. Jinyon rolled his shoulders, a crooked smirk crawling across his face, and told them he was just a man whose hobby was beating the likes of them. Cut to the Yuhuna merchant group estate. Chayol Myungho exploded into a chaotic scene outside the main gate as 2 Moyong clan escorts held him fast. He thrashed and roared, demanding why Jinyan had gone to the Muram Alliance, why now, and screamed for them to let him go while raining curses on his captors. Hua Yan burst in, announcing the Moyang patriarch had decided Jinyan must testify in person about the Uyang clan incident, and had rushed off, then pointed out the escorts were sent by the Moyang clan and ordered them to release him. Once freed, Cheol Mi Young Ho crumpled to the ground, a ragged sigh ripping out of him as he spat that Jin Yan had walked away even after promising him. When Hua Yan asked what that promise was, Myongho's mind locked on one brutal truth. Jin Yan had forced him to slog through 100,000 swings, and he cringed at how mortifying it would be to say it aloud. A moment later, he yanked his pants down, squatted at the gate, and screamed that he'd promised to shit there if Jin Yan didn't tell him the next step, then begged desperately, "Did you hear that?" Hua Yan, disgusted, slammed the gate shut and snapped that if it truly mattered, he should sprint after Jin Yan and settle it face to face. He brushed them off with a hurried, "I'm busy." Myongho sprang up and yanked his pants up again, cursing as he realized Jin Yan had already left for the Murim alliance. Clutching his umbrella like a blade, he gritted his teeth and muttered he wasn't a fool to be toyed with, then declared, cold as poison, that he was a venomous fox. He hoisted his umbrella like a banner, clenched its shaft with iron resolve, and roared that he'd storm into the Murim alliance himself. He bolted down the street, umbrella a whirling blur as he screamed the count, his voice carrying as he yelled to Jin Yan what came next and roared he'd already reached 101,203 swings. Behind Jin Yan, the criminals snapped their attention to him, and the original wanted criminal exploded with laughter, offering a mocking apology that he shouldn't laugh in front of his seniors before sneering, "Who's beating who, you runt?" He smirked that since he'd baited Jin Yan outside, he was slipping away, claiming he was busy. Jin Yan glared and asked if the man known as the lustful swordsman was off to relieve himself. The criminal's gaze honed into a razor, a grin splitting his face as he barked for Jin Yan to repeat himself. Jin Yan stayed cool, asked why he was so touchy, and pointed out even a healthy man could do that. Jin Yan roared, locking eyes on Baek Hankyung as he demanded permission to kill the wanted man, and Hankyung answered like a judge's hammer, cold and firm. The man is officially registered as a public enemy of the Murim alliance. Immediate execution authorized. Jin Yan snapped the wraps on his arm into place and hissed, "Immediate execution." A faint smile flickered across Jin Yan's face. Han Kyung's eyes narrowed as he watched, admitting in his head that after 3 days traveling together, this was the first time he'd seen him smile. Jin Yan's grin widened as he declared he liked the sound of it. Steel flashed as the criminals drew their swords at him. The wanted criminals snarled, spitting bastard at Jinny. They unleashed a hail of daggers at him, snarling, "Who's really going to kill who?" Jin Yan snapped aside as the first volley of daggers screamed past. Then another streaked in. He snatched all three midair like they were weightless. Then they rocketed skyward, tearing through the air. He hurled 2 daggers into the other criminals, pinning them and leaving the wanted man exposed. The wanted criminal's eyes snapped wide when he realized Jin Yan had deliberately held back his daggers. Jin Yan landed like a cat and demanded to know from the lustful swordsman what crime had made him a wanted man. He forced a tight, nervous grin as the green she crept up to wrap his hand, and he snapped that this wasn't something men should be discussing. He snarled he'd trained a limb Jin Yan couldn't even use, then hurled himself forward with every ounce of strength, swearing he'd rip it off. Jin Yan's eyes narrowed to slits, ice in his voice as he hissed, "Not so fast." He drove a surgical strike straight into the man's right arm. He smashed it into the ground. The criminal howled in agony, sprawled on the ground. His voice cracked as he spat, "Bastard," at Jinny, panic clawing at his chest. He knew he couldn't beat this opponent, so if death was coming, he'd at least go down fighting. Desperation sent him bolting upright, his shout ripping the air as he trembled in surrender, begging to be taken to the Murim alliance to accept punishment, and pleading that Jin Yan not lay a hand on his manhood. Jin Yan dropped into a crouch, leaned in close, and demanded to know why he would choose to surrender. His voice trembled as he pleaded that if he surrendered the case would be closed. Then he dropped a bomb. He had intel on other wanted men, and begged them to keep him alive because he wasn't finished speaking. Jinny's fist rocketed into his face, a lightning-fast, bone-crushing punch. Blood gushed from the man's mouth as Jin Yan smirked and taunted, "I don't need you to surrender. You aren't of the Murim alliance." He sprang to his feet. He shot Han Kyung a quick look and, shrugging like it meant nothing, wondered if they should have delivered the criminal alive instead. Han Kyung loomed over the lifeless bodies strewn around them, voice flat as steel as he said it was better this way, and told Jin Yan not to worry. He strode forward and snapped that they had to find food. He was starving. Janaean nodded in agreement. Later that day, the two barreled into the inn just as steaming bowls slammed onto the table. Han Kyung flashed a confident grin and told Janaean he seemed to have a lot of experience. The fight they'd just watched had erased his doubts, and Janaean shot back, "What doubts are you talking about?" Hank Yong's head dropped as he had to admit that when he first heard a merchant group's heir had toppled the head of the Ouyang clan, he thought it impossible. Jin Yan's name was barely known. Jin Yan ate without skipping a beat. Between bites he simply said, "I understand." Hong Kyong snapped his head up, and voice like steel, declared that watching Jinyun's battle proved he truly had that level of skill. Hank Young vowed he'd testify to Jinyun's strength, so Jinyun could stop worrying about witnesses. Jinyun gave a quiet nod of thanks, while inwardly noting how suddenly talkative Hank Young had become. Then Hank Young smacked his chopsticks down on the table and demanded to know if Jinyun inched toward joining the Murim alliance and froze as Hank Young went on. This place paid scraps and chewed men up, but skill ruled there. The leader prized raw ability over bloodline, so with Jinyun's talent, he could climb fast and grab real rewards. He leaned in, voice like a blade. The Mariam Alliance is a different beast than the Rulers Association. The latter tempts with fatter pay and easier gigs, but it's run on clan power. Outsiders have no path up. The great houses guard their own while strangers are nothing but hired swords, and in real battle they shatter and drift away like autumn leaves. Jinny planted herself on 8, utterly silent. He replayed Mo Youngbin's actions in his head, each move looping sharp and impossible to ignore. He snapped aloud that not everyone in the ruler's circle fit that mold, insisting Hank Young's judgment was a reckless leap. From the second floor, a man who'd been eavesdropping suddenly cut them off. He scoffed, declared Jinyun right, sneering that Hank Young never stopped trash-talking everyone. He roared that calling the Rulers Association scattered like autumn leaves was an outrageous lie. Hank Young bolted to his feet. He spun and dropped into a bow before the man upstairs, owned up to speaking rashly, pleaded for forgiveness, and respectfully asked the man's name. A sly smirk split his face as he revealed himself. Surname, Autumn Wind. First name, Autumn Leaves. He spun to face his companions and roared with laughter. Jinyun brushed it off. Don't dwell, he's already apologized. And Hank Young nodded, accepting the apology. Jinyun shot a look upstairs and hissed, "Did they come because of what Oh Young said?" Noting they looked like men from the Rulers Association. Hank Young shrugged, saying he didn't know the man personally, but if he was with the association he was almost certainly here for the Dragon Phoenix tournament. Jin Yan echoed the name, letting it land like a dare. Hank Young leaned in and asked if he wanted in too, insisting Jin Yan was young, supremely skilled, and fully qualified to compete in the Grand Murim tournament that every eye would be on. A priceless proving ground. Jin Young shrugged, uninterested. Han Kyung pressed, insisting it was a chance to build fame, but Jin Young fired back that fame doesn't come from tournaments. It grows naturally through strength, and Han Kyung, sighing in regret, revealed the leader had promised a top-grade elixir to the winner. At that, Jinyun snapped, "Count me in!" and volunteered on the spot. Han Kyung froze, spat his drink out in surprise, and blurted an apology. He said he'd choked because Jin Young had changed his mind so quickly. Jin Young waved it off, told him not to worry since everyone makes mistakes, then jabbed that Han Kyung should have mentioned the elixir first. They burst out of the inn. Hank Young barreled into the man from upstairs at the exit. The man pinned Hank Young with a venomous glare, clicked his tongue, sneered that he was dragging his feet, and taunted that what he'd earlier dubbed the Smear Alliance now looked like the Slow Alliance. Hank Young's muscles snapped taut as he realized the man harbored deep, simmering grudges. Hank Young slid close to Jinyun and hissed, "Should we bolt from there like an autumn wind?" He froze, his nickname thrown at him like a knife, while Jin Young shrugged and said that was fine. No warning, the two exploded forward, tearing up a cloud of dust behind them. A lackey at his back barked that the punks had done it on purpose, jabbing at the churning dust. A girl coughed violently, and the man snapped his fan shut, ordering Yoon Seol to resume the roll call. He catapulted forward, grin blazing, swearing he'd prove what true mobility arts could do. An attendant bellowed encouragement while Yoon Seol sighed, muttering under her breath about his reckless behavior. Later that day, near the Murim Alliance, tension snapped like a drawn wire. The three of them exploded across the mountains, sprinting neck and neck to see who would arrive first. Jinyun hit the ground first. He flicked the dirt from his shoulders, while the others staggered and clawed to keep up behind him. Hong Kyung ground his teeth, muttering through clenched jaws as their sluggish pace shredded his patience. He snapped his head sideways and watched the man surge ahead, the gap between them yawning wider. Hank Young thudded onto a tree as the man stepped onto a rock. Fierce resolve flared in him. With renewed strength, he vowed the Rulers Association would not lose. They hurled themselves forward as one. They barreled straight for the Murim Alliance. Moments later, they slammed down almost in sync, landing right in front of Jinyun. Both gasping, Han Kyung rasped, "Who won? I only just edged ahead." The man snapped, "You must be blind!" Voice ragged, Hank Young rasped a desperate plea, pressing Jinyun to name the winner. Before Jinyun could even form an answer, a voice thundered from behind. "What's the point?" They whipped around and froze. The man striding toward them was unmistakable. They roared his title, "Alliance Leader." He grinned, looked down at Hank Young and the man, and crowed that in the end the victor was clearly that young master. Baek Hung-kyung sank to his knees the instant the Merim Alliance leader appeared, and the leader fixed him with a calm, commanding stare before saying, "You did well." Beside them a man strode forward, snapped into a sharp bow, and introduced himself as Hua Yun-wol of the Hua clan, sending a crisp greeting to the Alliance leader. Alliance leader's sharp gaze pivoted to Jinyan, eyes narrowing as he declared, "So you're the young master of the Yunha merchant group." Hua Yunwol's eyes narrowed as he sized up the young man. This was the very one who defeated the Ouyang patriarch, and a cold understanding clicked into place. Jin Yun bowed and announced himself as Jinyan of the Yunha merchant group. He answered in kind, standing tall as he declared, "I am Yu Zhonghong, leader of the Muram Alliance." He locked eyes with Hua Yun-wol and asked if he'd come to compete in the Dragon Phoenix tournament. Hua Yun-wol bowed his head and confirmed he had, and Alliance leader Yu Zhonghong wished him luck. The Alliance leader whirled to Jinyan and snapped, "Are you two heading to the main hall?" Jinyan gave a curt nod, and Yu Zhonghong stepped forward, declaring he'd accompany them as they strode ahead. From behind, Yun-wol slid forward, bowed again, and aimed his words straight at Jinyan. A razor-sharp glint flashed in his eyes as he vowed, "I'll see you at the Dragon Phoenix tournament." Jinyan whipped around the moment those words landed, but Hua Yun-wol was already striding away. After a few moments of walking together, the Alliance leader Yu Zhonghong spoke again, declaring Hank Young's mobility art ranked dead last this time. Baek Hank-young's face flamed as he shot back that it was impossible, insisting they'd arrived almost at the same time, and Yu Zhonghong chuckled lightly and, rumor had it young Master Hua hadn't unleashed his full power. He'd come to the tournament to conserve his strength and probe his opponent's mettle. The Alliance leader confessed he didn't know the full story, but swore he'd seen Han Kyung sprint shoulder to shoulder with Hua Yun-wol, refusing to yield, and he laughed at the memory. Flustered, Baek Hank-young spun to Jinyan and demanded if he'd known already. Jinyan simply nodded, confirming it. Embarrassment flared in Hank-young, his cheeks burning as he muttered that Hua Yun-wol was the kind to use tricks for needless things. Jinyan smirked faintly and told him there was nothing to be offended about. He leaned in and said anyone about to step into a martial contest instinctively masks their full strength. Han Kyung exhaled sharply and muttered that he understood. Jin Young flashed an easy smile and reassured him not to be embarrassed. Inside the Miriam Alliance's main hall, tension simmered. A man shot forward to greet the Alliance leader as he arrived. Yu Zhonghong brushed him off with a lazy wave and returned a sharp, acknowledging nod. He strode to the center of the hall and ordered everyone out except the Yunha merchant group's young master, declaring he'd rule on Ouyang's statements only after testing Jinyan's martial ability. The others scattered like startled birds, leaving only Jinyan and the Alliance leader standing in the silent hall. He barked, "Alliance leader Yu Zhonghong, Baek and Jinyan, come closer." Jinyan bowed in assent and stepped forward. Closing in, a jolt of memory slammed into him. It had been ages since he'd stood this close to the man. Jinyan remembered Yu Zhonghong as the Muram Alliance leader, renowned only beneath the 3 gods and 1 saint, who rallied and commanded every orthodox sect in the final clash with the demonic faction at the Battle of the 5 Tombs, hauled the 3 gods and 1 saint to the front, and personally spearheaded the assault. To Jinyan, he demanded respect. A cold stare from Alliance leader Yu Zhonghong ripped him out of his thoughts. Yu locked eyes and said flatly that he too wore a stern expression. The Alliance leader grinned, saying the Jianghu was full of juniors like him, but he preferred those who acted their age because they put him at ease. Jinyan bowed his head, a faint smile curving his lips as he said he understood, and the Alliance leader laughed warmly, telling him he looked even better when he smiled. Then his tone snapped. He admitted he'd been burning with curiosity since earlier and hurled at Jinyan. "Are you perhaps the Fist King's successor?" The question slammed into Jinyan, knocking the breath from him. He froze, and before he could react, Yu Zhonghong's smirk curled darker as he leaned in and pressed, asking how many techniques Jinyan had learned from his master. Jinyan lowered his head and fell silent, and after a few moments, he exhaled like a storm and snapped, "How could Yu Zhonghong possibly know that?" The Alliance leader stayed icy cool and asked why he was getting angry, and he insisted Jinyan used brutal fist techniques and bent lightning to his will. The moment Jinyan confirmed both, Yu Zhonghong sprang into action. In Muram's history, lightning energy was handled by 4 powers: the Jimen, a sword clan; the Namgong, who turned to Taoist arts; the Baikli, who abandoned the practice after repeated failures; and the Sect of Enlightenment. Only the Sect of Enlightenment remained, the Fist King's order, and Yu Zhonghong spat that sect was the wrong word. They followed strict single succession, accepting only 1 successor. Jinyan's lips curled into a private smirk. He knew that deduction was exactly what the Alliance leader would do. His gaze sharpened to a blade as he admitted the truth with iron resolve and roared, "I am the Fist King's successor!" Yu Junghong's glare pinned him in place. Then a smile cracked across his face. A hand dropped on his shoulder, as the other declared fate had brought them together. He said he'd suspected as much. Yu Junghong jabbed a finger at Jinyan and said those who mastered lightning-style martial arts always wore a domineering aura. Their eyes, energy, tone, even temperament, took on the raw fury of lightning. That was why he had no special memories with the Fist King. The man had wanted only to be a lone bolt tearing the heavens apart, and someone like that could form no real friendships. He turned to Jinyan and demanded to know how his master was faring, confessing he hadn't heard a single word about him. Jinyan shot back that his master was just like the Moyong clan's former patriarch. He'd cut every tie and kept no contact at all. Alarm flared across Yu Junghong's face and he snapped, "Did he meet Mo Yong-chu?" Jinyan admitted the Fist King rarely sent word. But the truth was grimmer. His link to the king had been cut off completely, and he knew, deep in his bones, it was gone forever. Yu Junghong plunged into a storm of thought. He murmured, "I understand," then swore he'd deliver the news to the three gods and the lone saint. A cold knot tightened in his gut as Murim's martial masters vanished one by one, and he snapped, "Are the demonic ranks stirring again?" Then vowed that if they returned they'd be dragged back into battle, just like before. He finally confessed, voice tight, that Jinyan wouldn't know. It had happened before he was even born. Jinyan whispered, "Do you mean the Battle of the Five Tombs?" Yu Junghong confirmed it, eyes blazing as he revealed that the world called it the Battle of the Five Tombs. But a hidden second battle erupted afterward. 3 gods and 1 saint slammed into a single grandmaster of the demonic faction. He spat 1 man like a dare. They told of the crushing despair that had devoured them in that moment. And every time he heard the sword god was still training, the memory slammed him back into those days. That single, brutal clash sealed the fate of the Great War between the Orthodox defenders and the demonic forces. 3 gods and a saint squared off against a lone man. He confessed it was a secret he'd long only shared with Alliance members, and the very spark that forced them all to grow stronger. He dropped a bomb. If the Grandmaster had left any descendants, they'd be roughly Jinyan's age. He lunged, fingers snapping shut around Virginia's hand. He shoved him into strength, demanding power with an all-consuming selfish hunger. Then his expression softened again, and he guaranteed Jinyan not to worry about Oh Yong-sang. As the Fist King's successor, there was no room for doubt. Oh Yong-sang would be locked in the dungeon, the decision already sealed. He called out whether Ginyan would join the Dragon Phoenix tournament too. Ginyan confirmed, and he waved him off to rest. Ginyan bowed his head and thanked him. "Catch you later." Ginyan strode through the Morium Alliance, each footfall striking the air like a dare. As he stepped out of the main hall, the conversation he'd had with Yu Junghong slammed back into him. A memory slammed into him. He'd asked who the Grand Master had been, the man who charged alone at 3 gods and a saint. Yu Junghong, the Alliance leader, snarled that the demonic faction's peak had no name. Jinyan demanded if the man was truly dead. Yu Junghong's voice hardened into steel as he said they'd slashed him over and over, burned him, and gathered his ashes. They hurled them across Mount Huangshan, Mount Wuyi, Mount Tai, Mount Li, and Mount Amy, stashing each where it could survive if that action sparked disaster again. He swore that next time he'd obliterate them completely. Descendant or not a single ash would remain. Jinyan fell silent, the image of the Alliance leader, alone and tiny in the vast hall, searing itself into his mind. His venerable image shattered. He no longer looked worthy of respect. Not a man, but a monster hammered into being by the merciless times. A sickening truth slammed into him. The real opposite of the demonic faction wasn't the Orthodox. It was just another kind of monster, and he couldn't tell if he'd end up any different. He saw the Jianghu, born from the mutual slaughter of the Orthodox and the demonic alike, as nothing less than Asura's war-ravaged realm. His thoughts shattered when Beak Hank Young strode up and fired off. "Did your talk with the Alliance leader go well?" Jinyan replied, cool and steady, that it had. Hank Young flashed a relieved grin and told him he'd already informed the others. Staying inside the Alliance itself might be painfully uncomfortable for Jinyan. They'd already set up lodgings outside. He stepped forward to lead him there, and Jinyan nodded a quick, grateful thanks. After some time they pulled up at the lodgings prepared for him. Hank Young swept his arm toward the building and announced, "This is the place," and Jinyan thanked him again. They stepped inside, and Hank Young crowed that he'd asked for a sunny room, daring them to check if it was true. Before he finished, a casual voice floated from the room. "Oh, you're here?" Shock slammed into Han Kyung. He jabbed a finger at the man and barked, "Who are you?" Jinyon exhaled, seeing who was inside, muttering that he'd finally shown up. Chu Myungho lounged there with both feet propped on the table, legs crossed, casually holding an umbrella. Myungho hollered that the place was ridiculously huge and gorgeous, then groused that he'd barely slept a wink and practically had to drag himself here. Jinyon leaned against the doorframe and demanded how he'd tracked the place down. Chu Myungho waved him off with a proud grin, boasting he'd gone to every inn asking for any room under the name Jinyon, chuckling that it was nothing. Then, smirking, he flung the umbrella right into Jinny's path, and roared that he'd swung 100,000 times. Crow swore he was a man of his word. He'd stormed over mountain passes on horseback and sailed across oceans just to ask what came next. And now he declared the poisonous fox had finally arrived. Chul Myung-ho snapped, impatience crackling in his voice as he ordered them to move on to the next thing. Jin Young exhaled and shot the question at Baekhan Kyung. "Is there a good place nearby to train?" Baekhan Kyung paused, nodded he knew one. The next day the group stood before a secluded waterfall tucked deep in the mountains, water smashing off the cliffs and hurling mist into the air. Baekhan Kyung strode to the cliff's edge and proclaimed, "This is the place." A quiet, perfect training ground the Maram Alliance, himself included, used often, while Chul Myung-ho swept his gaze across the open stretch and grinned at how spacious it was. Jin Yon dropped into a grateful bow, pouring out sincere thanks. Baekhan Kyung returned the bow, brushed it off with a calm, "Don't mention it," and moved to leave, then turned to address Jin Yon politely, before he could finish. Chul Myung-ho smirked, jabbed a thumb at his chest and declared, "I'm Chul Myung-ho, the poisonous fox." And the pig Hankyong blinked, wary, bowed its head and called him Sir Chul. As Paik Hang Kyung strode away, Chul Myung-ho looked back at Jinyon and snapped, "You training too?" Then smirked and reminded him he was already strong. He'd even seen Jinyon shoot lightning once. Jinyon snapped that the white lightning 10-phase art alone wouldn't cut it. His inner energy had deepened, and he intended to train the Phantom Blossom Divine art as well. Chul Myung-ho gaped, bewilderment sparking in his eyes, and snapped, "What's the white lightning 10-phase art?" Without another word, Jinyon hurled himself off the cliff, landed with cat-like grace on a rock beneath the roaring waterfall, then snapped at Myung-ho to forget it. He wouldn't understand anyway. Seething, Chul Myung-ho bellowed from above, demanding whether Jinyon was looking down on him. Jinyon merely tilted his head, let out a long, weary sigh, and warned he'd explain it only once, so he'd better listen carefully. He plunged his right foot into the water, and lightning chi detonated from his sole, splintering the surface into dazzling sparks. He explained the white lightning 10-phase art was pure offense, but pure offense couldn't beat true martial masters, and as he spoke, memories of the many battles he'd fought surged through him. He went on that even the strongest fighters had to learn to counter, exploit, and redirect an opponent's techniques, the very principles the Phantom Blossom Divine art perfected. Chul Myung-ho leaned in and echoed Jinyon's words under his breath. This was about turning an enemy's own technique against them. Jinyan thrust his arm out and a hulking hand of pure ki erupted above him as he revealed the Phantom Blossom Divine art's ultimate secret. The Phantom Reach, a power that moves distant objects without touch, bends the path of an opponent's weapon, or snatches it outright. Deadly for a close-quarters fighter like him. That martial art proved absolutely indispensable. To prove it, he shot his hand forward and, in a flash, he snatched a flower branch hovering in midair. Chul Myung-ho shut his eyes, nodded slowly and scoffed that it sounded like a thief's trick. Then, out of nowhere, a flash of lightning slammed into him. He plummeted down the cliff, and Jinyan peered over the edge, sneering that his dull excuse for a brain shouldn't bother trying to understand. Groaning, Chul Myung-ho hauled himself upright and muttered, "I understand now," while Jinyon eyed him and said he was finally starting to grasp it, that his 100,000 strikes hadn't been wasted, then asked, "How does it feel to finally reach your goal?" Chul Myung-ho yanked up his sleeve, flexed his arm, and said he felt nothing but thicker muscles. He sprang to his feet and snapped at Jinyon. "You should have just explained it nicely from the start." Jinyan snatched up the umbrella lying nearby. He'd thrown Myung-ho a lifeline when he spotted raw potential. Some people just can't seize a chance like that. Determined to raise the stakes, he held the umbrella out toward Jules Myung-ho, and growled that after he had swung 100,000 downward strikes, only one of them had ever truly mattered. He then slammed the umbrella down like a thunderbolt, its tip stopping a hair's breadth from Myung-ho's face. He barked that to block, parry, or counter an opponent's attack, he had to zero in on the one most efficient trajectory among all those strikes and use it. One misstep and death would claim him. Chul Myung-ho locked his gaze on the umbrella inches from his face and hissed the most efficient phrase under his breath. Jinyan leaned in and laid it out. From the single most efficient strike plucked from 100,000, the most precise slash culled from 200,000, and the fastest, sharpest thrust born of 300,000, you must extract, refine, and connect them into a complete sequence. That, he said, was what martial artists call the basic form. Masters from every sect probe, reshape, and polish these sequences through endless repetition until they reach the perfection called swordsmanship. But he warned that learning swordsmanship was not the end. Real combat was a different beast, and only real experience could forge true battle instinct. Stripped of it and of iron discipline, they'd be dead long before they ever tasted mastery. Jinyan's words hit like a punch. Chulmyung froze, shock pinning him to the spot. His knees buckled. He crumpled to the ground, a weary smirk tugging at his lips. A brutal clarity slammed through him. He finally understood why martial artists so often lost their minds during training. He roared that they were all crazy. Crazy bastards, every single one. Jinyan glared and snapped that he was wrong if he thought no one in the Jianghu was crazier than him. Manhwa muttered back, voice low and uncertain. Maybe he was right. Jinyan's voice snapped into steel as he told him not to worry. He'd never planned to teach him the difficult sword arts. Manhwa exploded, demanding why wouldn't mastering stronger techniques make him grow faster? After all, countless martial artists had joined great sects and learned their famed moves earlier and harder than he ever could. Jinyan bellowed his name, then shot back that he was joining a sect to train in its legendary sword arts. All the training under a great master still wasn't enough. He snapped that real strength came down to one brutal truth: the person who lived their life most seriously. Footsteps pounded the cliff above as Alliance leader Yu Zhenghong appeared with Baekhyung at his side. Down below, Chul Myung-ho said he was starting to understand, and Jin Yong snapped that he hadn't expected much anyway. Above, Baek Han-kyung whirled to Yo Jung-hong and fired off an apology. Sadie hadn't realized the Alliance leader planned to train there, and had accidentally dragged the two of them along. Yo Jung-hong's smirk widened as he peered down at the chaos below and tossed out, "It's fine." He was savoring the spectacle. Jin Yon slid the umbrella back to Chul Myung-ho and declared, "Ask 10 people about the greatest sword arts in Jongho's history, and 9 will name Doko's 9 sword strikes as the best." Myung-ho's face lit up. "I've heard of that," he laughed, remembering how as a kid he'd whirl a stick and shout, "Doko's 9 sword strikes" everywhere, and Jinyan let a faint smile ghost across his lips. He leaned in and revealed a single sword art had eclipsed it. Curiosity flared in Myung-ho, who demanded to know, and Ginyan replied that it was the Jinsoan sword art blazes. He's a man consumed by an obsession with swords. Myung-ho swallowed and admitted he'd never heard the name, and Jinyan snapped that Jin Sohan belonged to no sect. Anyone who wanted to truly understand the Jonghu had to know his story. He was born into a traveling performer troupe and grew up learning the sword dance. Myung-ho cut in with a wicked grin, blurting, "You mean that seductive dance where they slice people's clothes off with a sword?" Jinyan nodded, and Myung-ho's eyes shot wide as he gasped in disbelief. Jinyan declared it true. Jin Sohan had danced with the older women who raised him, and he urged Myung-ho to imagine that boy's mind. A child who spent over 10 years honing sword dancing, not to harm but to protect those who took him in. An orphan who lived only for others. When he finally mastered that blade built to kill, enlightenment detonated inside him in one blinding burst. Jinyan proclaimed that was how Jin Sohan left the Doko's 9 sword strikes in the dust, and forged the greatest sword art the world had ever seen. Chul Myung-ho nodded, admiration blazing, declared it a beautiful story, and insisted the art's greatness didn't spring from the dance itself. Jinyan jabbed a finger at his own chest. He thundered that neither dazzling sword art nor a sect's prestige meant a thing. What counted was Jin Sohan pouring his soul into 10 brutal years of sword dancing, nothing else. He warned Myung-ho, "Strength is forged by the life you choose. Scurry like a mere rat, or strike like a poisonous fox. The choice was his alone." Myung-ho flashed a resolute grin, told Jinyan he understood now, and asked for the next step. He thrust the umbrella back into his hands. Jinyan locked him in her gaze and snapped, "Will you have any regrets?" Myung-ho shot back in an iron voice, "I'll never do it." Jinyan snatched the umbrella and he unleashed a blistering sword technique, and when he finished and lowered his blade, he asked, "Myung-ho, do you remember it?" Myung-ho's proud smile flashed as he snapped, "Do I look like an idiot?" and declared this time he wouldn't stop at 100,000 swings. He'd press on until he reached 1,000,000. Perched above, the Alliance leader's jaw dropped as he whispered Trisword technique, and declared young Master Li utterly remarkable. His gaze softened, and he admitted to himself it had been a long time since he'd been able to relax and train alongside someone like that. Year after year, his friends vanished one by one. Most of his subordinates had already scattered. He called out. He'd been utterly blown away by the show that day. As time raced on, he swore he'd craft a gift in return. Under the roaring waterfall, Jinyun and Chul Myung-ho pushed their training harder. Chul Myung-ho drilled without pause, whipping the umbrella into a relentless, dizzying blur. Jinyun dove into meditation just nearby as the sun bled into dusk. Jinyun dove headfirst into the phantom blossom divine art, hammering his body and spirit in relentless training. He hoisted a cascade of rocks into the air with nothing but his chi. Watch him. Chul Myung-ho spluttered under his breath, disbelief strangling his words as Jinyun now even bent objects with his mind. After a while, rain lashed the mountainside as Alliance leader Yu Jong-hong advanced, umbrella poised above his head. Jinyun, still training beneath the roaring waterfall, spotted the silhouette through the mist, snapped upright, inclined his head in respect, and whispered, "Alliance leader?" Yu Jong-hong froze a few paces away and asked for a word. Jinyun stilled his training and replied coolly, greeting the leader after a long while. The Alliance leader smiled faintly and said he'd seen Jinyun train several times before, commending his diligence. Chul Myung-ho slammed his practice to a halt and stared as the elder approached, his mind reeling. This had to be the Murim Alliance's rumored leader, and he couldn't fathom how Lee Jinyun could know him personally. The leader's steely eyes snapped to Myung-ho and he barked, "Who is that?" Chul Myung-ho sank into a deep, formal bow and, in a respectful tone, announced, "I'm Chul Myung-ho, Alliance leader." Yu Jong-hong studied him for a beat, then pointed at the scar on his cheek and said it looked like a sword wound. Myung-ho, still bowing low, spat that it hadn't come from a sword but from a dagger. The Alliance leader demanded to know what had happened. Myung-ho froze, his voice cracking into stammers, and Yu Jong-hong leaned in, driving the question. Was it from a duel or from training? Silence stretched like a held breath. Then Myung-ho spat the truth into the room. He confessed he'd once run a gambling den, and that the scar came from a fight with a debtor who refused to pay. The man had plunged a dagger into his face. The words landed like a sledgehammer. Jinyun and Yu Jong-hong froze, silence swallowing the room. Myung-ho's head hung low, regret gnawing at him as he tore into himself for being such a fool. Of all the words he could have spoken to the Murim Alliance leader, he picked the one that laid bare a shame so heavy it burned him. He could have spun it into a duel or a training wound, anything with a scrap of honor. Instead, he blurted the mortifying truth, and for a brief moment the room went silent. Yu Jong-hong finally broke his silence. "I see," he murmured, then raised his left arm, bearing a faint scar that ran along it. He leaned in and spilled his story. His father had once run a tiny brewery that supplied taverns and even hauled the barrels himself. One day, when he was just a boy. Back then, Yu Jong-hong stood frozen as drunken men savagely beat his father inside a tavern. He hadn't tamed the blade yet. He clutched only a splintered stick. He swung it like a man on the edge, desperation roaring through every wild arc. The drunks were weaklings, not men of strength. No one died, but he sent them all sprawling to the ground. He pictured his father frozen, shock carved into his face by what had happened. A figure lunged to his side, slamming a palm over the gash in his arm to staunch the bleeding. Yu Jong-hong hadn't even realized he was wounded until that instant. His father hoisted him onto his back and sprinted home. The first time in years he'd carried him. He remembered the man's torn sleeve skimming his skin, a cold jolt he couldn't shake. Sweat drenched him, warmth clinging to his skin like a living cloak. He murmured, a soft smile tugging at his lips. Maybe that's why the scar never faded. He stepped into the Janghu and the truth slammed into him. Everyone walked in carrying their own story. The rain relented and sunlight tore through the clouds. Yu Jong-hong snapped his umbrella shut, eyes locking on the tattered one at Myung-ho's side as he demanded, "Is that your weapon?" And Myung-ho shot back an awkward glance. He spun to Jinyun and confessed he'd only borrowed it, and Yu Jong-hong replied with a single cool, "I see." He thrust his umbrella toward Myung-ho. "Fine, I'll lend you one myself," he said. Myung-ho jolted, froze for a heartbeat, then finally reached out and snatched it into his palm. The weight almost yanked him off his feet. "It's heavy," he gasped. The Alliance leader gave a curt nod and proclaimed it a black iron umbrella. A gift from the Moyung clan to the Murim Alliance. Its ribs and shaft were hammered from black iron, so massive and unyielding he swore you could swing it 1,000,000 times, and it still wouldn't break. "Take it." Myung-ho wrestled the weapon into his hands, a brittle laugh tearing from his throat. He poured out frantic thanks, voice cracking as he wondered aloud if he even deserved something like this. Yu Jong-hong murmured his name. Myung-ho snapped upright and answered without hesitation. The Alliance leader's voice went cold as he snarled, "Do you regret living such a shameful life?" The question slammed into Myungho and froze him where he stood. Silence strangled the air between them as he stared at the ground. Silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then he cut through it with a hushed, barely audible answer. "You better believe I do!" Yu Jung-hung snorted under his breath, a low, contemptuous scoff. He anchored a firm hand on the younger man's shoulder. "If you can atone for yesterday's wrongs and live properly today," he said, "you're already a good man. Stop tearing yourself apart over the past." Myungho dropped his head again and murmured he understood, bowing once more with true sincerity, as the alliance leader gave a faint smile and said lingering around an old man wears you out. He whirled to face Jinian and declared he couldn't wait to see him at the Dragon Phoenix tournament. Jinian bowed in quiet respect. As Yu Jung-hung strode away, he called over his shoulder, "Whether you swing your fist or brandish your umbrella, we'll meet again. And next time, be on the orthodox faction's side." After a beat, both Jin-young and Myungho pinned him with their gazes as he walked away. Jin-young spun and declared it lunchtime, but Myungho shook his head and stayed behind to train a little longer. As Jin-young strode away, laughter echoed behind him. Myungho gripped the black iron umbrella, laughing to himself between ragged breaths. "The alliance leader himself pressed a weapon into my hands," his voice alight with joy as he said it. His laugh warped into shaky, hiccup-laced bursts. From across the square, Jin-young shut his eyes and searched to know whether Myungho laughed or sobbed. Days blurred into the eve before the Dragon Phoenix tournament. The streets crackled with excitement and voices thundered through the air. At the center of the public arena, a man roared to the Younghoos seniors and juniors. "Do you know what the Eve Festival is?" Perched in his room on the inn's upper floor, Jin-young peered through the window as people swarmed the stage below as the speaker warned the Dragon Phoenix tournament had drawn so many contenders that countless fighters had worn themselves out just waiting for their turn in the brutal preliminaries. He thundered the Eve Festival existed to let anyone challenge whoever they wished before the real competition began. And he shouted that if anyone realized tonight they weren't ready, they shouldn't so much as set foot in the tournament tomorrow. "We don't need weaklings dragging out the event until sunset," he bellowed, igniting the crowd into roaring cheers and laughter as someone in the stands snapped back, "That's right!" Perched above, Jin-young muttered that the Eve Festival sounded interesting. And down below, the announcer snapped his gaze to someone in the crowd and bellowed, "Hey, you with the umbrella, you were mouthing off earlier. How about showing us your umbrella skills?" The crowd whipped around as the man jabbed a finger at Chul Myung-ho. Stunned, Myung-ho shot back, "What are you talking about?" And the announcer roared again, accusing him of kicking off an earlier argument by mocking his weapon. From his window, Jin-young snapped his gaze to the side, jaw clenching as he thought Myung-ho was always causing trouble. Whispers and snickers swarmed Myung-ho. Some laughed outright that his weapon was an umbrella, and when one jeered, "Then show us what that umbrella can do." Chul Myung-ho's calm shattered. He'd had enough. He erupted, roaring, "Did the Murray Malians ban umbrellas as weapons?" and demanded to know why everyone was making such a fuss. From above, Jin-young shook his head, a faint smirk cutting across his face, as he muttered that even among martial masters, Myung-ho's temper raged on like wildfire. What a lunatic, he thought. Down below, Myung-ho roared again. "Do you even know who gave me this umbrella?" I hoisted it high, flashed a confident grin and said, "Fine, I'll humor you." He jabbed the umbrella forward and roared, "I'm Chul Myung-ho, the man who swung his sword 100,000 times. Then added he'd just learned slashing and thrusting from his master. Murmurs of amusement rolled through the crowd as they wrote his boast off as childish training. One man chuckled and shooed the others away, sure he'd mature eventually. A spear slung over his shoulder, the man cut through the crowd, locked eyes with Myung-ho and sneered. "Tri-sword technique? Your master must be impressive to teach you a move even street thugs know." I wasn't going to interfere. He refused to let a fool drag the Dragon Phoenix tournament through the mud. Myung-ho answered with icy calm. The tournament meant nothing to him, but he'd never refuse a fight. A savage smirk split his face as he hoisted his spear, snarling, "Then bring it on!" Moments later, both men planted themselves on the stage, facing each other in a tense standoff, and Jin-young, from his vantage point, watched every twitch. Curiosity surged. Who would win? Out of nowhere, Myung-ho shot forward. He roared, "The first to strike wins!" His opponent froze, jaw dropping as lightning-fast speed slammed into him. He barely croaked, "I'm fast," before twisting away and evading the blow. The umbrella thundered into the wooden platform, cracking the planks and gouging a small crater. The crowd dropped into a shocked hush. Myung-ho locked his gaze on the weapon trembling in his hands. Disbelief slammed into him. It was shorter than the umbrella he'd trained with. Ice crept across his features as he snapped into position, his thought dying on his lips. His opponent cackled, contempt slicing the air as he taunted that he couldn't even wield his own weapon. Before the man's taunt could even finish, Myung-ho spun and tore away from the fight. Gasps ripped through the crowd as fingers jabbed and shouts rang out that he was running away. Myung-ho wore no panic, only razor focus, as he bolted across the stage and hissed under his breath with fierce conviction. "I'll run for now." Chul Myung-ho spun in frantic circles on stage as the crowd detonated into roaring laughter. Voices ricocheting through the arena with spectators shouting they'd never seen a duel like this, and their laughter filling the air. Suddenly, the spear-wielding man slammed the butt of his weapon into Chul Myung-ho's right leg, with a solid, brutal strike. Chul Myung-ho crumpled to the ground with a guttural groan, clutching his leg. His opponent curled a cruel sneer, spat, "You little bastard," laughed at the idea he'd keep running in these cramped quarters, and smirked that Myung-ho's rat-like scampering had at least been entertaining. Chul Myung-ho clawed himself upright as his opponent snapped, "Get up, I'll show you how a real fighter does it." Wiping sweat from his chin, Myung-ho spat a curse under his breath, furious that the man had knocked him flat and was now barking orders to get up. What twisted joke was this? And how was he supposed to keep up? His opponent's grin snapped shut, souring into irritation in an instant. He lunged forward again and slammed the butt of his spear into Myung-ho's stomach, folding him over as raw pain ripped through him. He yanked the spear's shaft, his thoughts sprinting. "Fine," he thought. "At this range, I should be able to reach him." He snapped the umbrella sideways, but the spearman leaned back a hair, and the strike fell short, sliding past him with effortless grace. Myung-ho ground his teeth, fury flaring as his arm still fell short. They sneered and taunted him, crowing that his technique was sloppy since he'd only just learned the horizontal slash. He laughed, shot back that his thrusts were probably just as pathetic, then mockingly offered to show him how it should be done. His spear blurred into a silver storm, stabbing into Myung-ho again and again. The crowd erupted into jeers and savage laughter, howling for the fight to end. Some taunted Myung-ho, "Where's your earlier confidence now?" while others rained boos on the one-sided beating. Myung-ho teetered, clawing for balance as the opponent snapped his leg up and drove a savage kick clean across his face. Blood sprayed from Myung-ho's nose and mouth as he staggered backward. His eyes fought to focus as the world bled into shape through his blurred vision. His eyes snapped to Ginny, peering down from the window above. Bitter thoughts surged through him. "Ah, screw this," he spat. He'd seen it all, humiliation burning him alive. Then the Alliance leader's voice thundered inside his head. "Do you regret squandering your life as a pitiful fool?" A memory detonated in his chest, his legs locked like iron, yanking his backward slide to a dead stop. He froze, head bowed, crimson dripping to stain the wooden platform. Everyone's jaw dropped as he let out a laugh, soft at first, then exploding into a wild, roaring bellow. His opponent sneered, slinging the word insane at him and declaring he still hadn't come to his senses. The spearman hurled himself forward again, roaring he'd end it right there. Myung-ho tilted his head up, breath ragged, eyes locked on the incoming strike as a bitter thought sliced through him. "You ask me if I regret living like a fool?" Yeah. He squared up and met the strike head-on. The spear sliced across his left flank, ripping into his gut. Yet he held his ground. "I regret it like hell," he thought fiercely. He hoisted his umbrella high above his head, holding it aloft like a defiant banner. "From now on, I'm shifting gears and living a little differently." A feral grin split his blood-smeared face as he locked eyes with his opponent and sneered, "Thanks for closing the distance for me," before the man could react. Myung-ho slammed the umbrella down with every ounce of force, the blow landing dead center on the crown of his opponent's head. They blasted him into the wooden platform, the impact gouging a deep crater beneath him. Silence slammed over the crowd, disbelief carved on every face as murmurs rippled through them. Some stammering, "What happened?" Others muttering that he had it coming for dropping his guard, and a few daring to ask aloud what kind of umbrella could unleash that kind of power. On the stage, Chul Myung-ho doubled over, racked for breath, eyes locked on his fallen opponent. A grin crept across his face, inching wider. He burst into laughter as he leveled his umbrella like a lance at Jinyan, who still watched from the second-floor window. "Hey, master!" he snapped. Gratitude flared in him as he inwardly thanked Jinyan for sparing him and swore to repay the kindness woven into his teachings, because a single thought detonated in his mind. "I'm the poisonous fox. I settle every debt without fail." He roared triumphantly. "I won from above!" Jinyan cracked a grin at his words. The crowd erupted into confused chatter again, voices colliding in a frantic roar as dozens stood slack-jawed, unable to believe what they'd just witnessed. Some swore he'd actually won, while others hissed it couldn't be true, that he'd felled his opponent with a single strike, using nothing but an umbrella. Chul Myung-ho crumpled, whispering that he was a pathetic weakling, his body trembling as he confessed he could no longer move. Gasping, he barked that if everyone was satisfied, he would be leaving now. Before he could step back, a man from the crowd exploded onto the stage, screaming for him to stop and sneering at Myung-ho. "Where do you think you're going? One lucky win doesn't make you arrogant," he spat. "I'll teach you your place." Then another man sprang up right after, roaring that he had the right to fight instead. The young hosts sneered, crowing idiots, and jeering that they were so impatient they couldn't even take turns. More people started climbing up. He cursed inwardly, seething, "Ugh, these annoying bastards! Get a grip, Chu Myung-ho," before any of them could reach him. Jinian slid out of the darkness behind him, a living shadow. The air turned to iron as he planted himself between Myung-ho and the mob. The crowd froze, nerves raw as his aura slammed into them. One of them, his chest hammered as he demanded aloud what that overwhelming presence was and who the man was. Jinyan answered flat, "I'm a participant in the Dragon Phoenix tournament." Chul Myung-ho tilted his head and asked why he'd come down, and Jinyan shrugged, saying he was just here to enjoy the pre-festival. Myung-ho pinned the group with a cold stare and declared their fun was over. His master would be dealing with them next, and one man blinked, incredulous. The master of that umbrella guy? Myung-ho's eyes narrowed, bitterness seething as he thought the very men who had attacked him like rabid dogs were. They recoiled, terror snapping through them at the sight of Jinyan. A wild grin exploded on his face. Becoming stronger was the coolest thing in the world. And then his vision smeared, and his legs gave way. Before he could hit the ground, a man seized his arm and hauled him upright, then faced the crowd and spoke in a calm, velvety voice. He barked that it was getting late and ordered everyone to call it a night before tomorrow's main event. Whispers surged through the crowd. Someone recognized him and blurted, "That's the Hua clan's son, young Master Hua." While another murmured, "The rumors were true. He's breathtaking." Hua In-wall spun to Jinyan, leaned in like a coiled blade, and warned that if he wanted the Dragon Phoenix crown, he couldn't burn his strength on meaningless scuffles. Jinyan pinned him with a stare and asked, "Who are you?" "Autumn leaves?" he guessed. And after a heartbeat, the man answered plainly, "I'm Hua In-wall." His name tore through the chatter. The last onlookers scattered, and one of them muttered that he had a point. It was best to end things there. Jinyan exhaled softly as Hua In-wall grinned, marveling at the coincidence of sharing the same lodging. Then he beckoned Jinyan to his room later for a drink, promising he had something to give him. Jinyan snapped a sharp nod, every inch of her shouting agreement. Hua In-wall cracked a grin and vowed he'd see him in an hour. As he turned to leave, he spun toward Chul Myung-ho and said he'd made a serious impression, and Myung-ho, scratching the back of his head, offered a sheepish, hesitant mutter. As the commotion faded, a woman anchored herself on the second-floor balcony, silence cloaking her like armor. He peered down as pale moonlight washed the scene below in cold silver. Night deepened. Inside Hua In-wall's lodging, he nursed his drink alone when a faint scrape of footsteps snapped him to attention. Sail stormed into the room, her gaze ablaze as she snapped, "Hey, Un-wall!" He cocked an eyebrow at her tone and snapped about her manners. Sail crossed her arms, glared that she'd seen everything, and demanded why he'd cut the duel short. Un-wall's voice was ice calm as he named Jinyan a serious championship contender and, because he himself hunted that same crown, saw no reason to let the man reveal his full strength so early. Then he turned to her and asked, "What do you think of him?" Unsel grudgingly admitted he looked strong, and Un-wall nodded, satisfaction flashing as she declared, she was right. He said the last time they clashed in mobility arts, Jinyan had been deliberately holding back, throttling his speed to match theirs. He held the exact distance deliberately, every inch calculated. "That's the mark of experience," he said. He slouched back, a smirk curling his lips, and declared he'd meant to crush every successor of the great clans. Now he was even thinking of skipping this year's tournament outright. Unsel's eyes snapped wide as she shouted, "Is Jinyan really that strong?" Un-wall barked a laugh and owned up that she'd missed it. Jinyan never unleashed a single spark of inner energy during the duel. With raw, bone-crushing strength, he could have flattened every person there. Then, teasingly, he shot the question. Was she interested in him now? And Sail's face flamed bright red while Un-wall's grin stretched even wider. He smirked and teased that she should take their father's advice and marry him. She stammered, then shouted back in shocked denial. Un-wall let out a low, teasing chuckle, goading her that it was wiser to be tied to the world's mightiest merchant guild than to any martial clan, then accused her of slipping into his room out of pure curiosity to see what sort of man Jinyan really was. Flustered, she spun away, cheeks blazing, insisting she'd only been curious about his strength and hissing for him to forget it. Un-wall chuckled again and warned her, "If Jinyan wins the tournament, it'll already be too late." She spat, Ugh, he's not my type! And the words thundered off the walls, filling the room. Shock pinned her in place as Jinny himself stood in the doorway, looking painfully awkward. He swallowed hard, voice barely a whisper. May I come in? Hua Yunwol chuckled, shook his head with a knowing smile and said, Oh dear. Then, in a heartbeat, Hua Yunsail crashed her head into the corner wall. Li Jinyan froze as her reaction slammed into him, and one furious thought detonated in his head. Crazy bitch. He tore his gaze over her from head to toe, his mind churning, then decided she didn't seem like it. At the front, Yunwol roared with laughter at the ridiculous scene, announced Jinyan's arrival, jabbed a finger at the girl with her head against the wall, his foolish little sister, and declared she was one of the top contenders to win the Dragon Phoenix tournament, and, as Jinyan could see, a total tomboy. Yunsail whirled to her brother and bellowed, Brother! Her voice softened as she spun to face Jinyan and declared, Hua Yunsail! Jinyan shot back, Li Jinyan. Minutes later, they slid into seats together at the table. Yunsail tipped the teapot, letting a ribbon of steaming tea cascade into the waiting cup. After a few moments she froze, a single question burning in her mind. Why was she even here? Off to the side, Yunwoo snatched a glove and stashed it under the table. He flicked a sharp signal to his sister, ordering her to hand it to young Master Li, and Yunsail erupted, protesting, Why me? She snatched the glove from beneath the table. Yunwol boomed that Yunsail had earlier found Jinyoung quite impressive, and had something she wanted to give him. Would he accept it? Jinyan seethed inwardly. He hadn't even done anything. Yun whirled to Ginyan and snapped, This is a treasured fist guard of our clan, not some metal-attacking gauntlet. It's only a glove to shield your hands. Accept it as my peace offering. Jinyan snatched the gauntlet and inspected it, thinking, Clan's fist guard, huh? Looks good. Then he spoke aloud, vowing he'd put it to good use. Yunwol leaned in and demanded, Young Master Li, do you know who the favorites for the Dragon Phoenix tournament are? Jinyan replied bluntly, I don't. Yunwol's eyes flashed. That's not good. You're this uninformed about current affairs? Yunsel, explain it to him, someone snapped. Yunsel lifted a brow and shot back, Again? Brother, you know this better than I do. Yunwol's face went stone cold as he snapped, Just do as you're told, fixed young Master Li with a stare and asked, Want to hear about Yunsail's childhood? Yunsail cut in instantly. I'll explain. She rattled off a roster of hopefuls, but the contest really boiled down to a duel between two titans, the Murray Maliance and the Rulers Association. Murray Maliance threw Jin Gail of MANHUA and Lim Jiryong of Wudong into the spotlight as top picks, though both might duck out. MANHUA throws lives away in every duel, and Wudong refuses to meddle in worldly affairs. The Rulers Association threw its weight behind Duck Gohan and Namgun Wei, and Yunsail warned that if those two met in the finals, neither would walk away unscathed. When Jinyan asked why, Yunsail snapped that they're love rivals, both crazy for Baikli Yin, the South's unrivaled beauty, and if they clashed, they'd shred each other trying to humiliate the other before her. The name slammed into Jinyan. He froze as Thaikli Yin burned in his mind, and he wondered if she could be She was the senior's daughter, the very person he'd owed everything to in his past life. A slow grin spread across his face. The little girl had blossomed into a woman admired by every heir in the great clans. Once an uncle figure to her, he now stood shoulder to shoulder with her peers. He cracked a grin and thought to himself, what a strange feeling. Yun pressed on, her explanation snapping into place as she revealed her brother belonged to the Rulers Association too. She called him a dark horse, but nobody expected him to win. He'd never once fought a public duel, and life grated on him at every turn. Jinyan pinned Yunwol with his gaze and thought the autumn leaf lacked any instinct to fight. Or perhaps, he was so formidable he didn't even have to struggle. Jinyan conceded this man was fear-made flesh. Yunsail rolled on, declaring 2 wild cards had slipped into this year's competition. Cloaked from most eyes, yet murmurs swore they wielded terrifying power. She spat that one hailed from the Hanan sect, and the other, she said. The figure revealed himself as Jinyan. Jinyan snorted. Variables, huh? I've heard enough. Yunwol leaned in, voice razor-sharp, and asked, How prepared is Jinyan for the tournament? Jinyon fell silent as he snapped the gauntlet onto his hand, a smug smirk curling his lips as he said, I apologize, but none of the competitors I've heard about even register on my radar. The words slammed into Yunwol and Yunsail, freezing them in place. Silence stretched long before Yunwol suddenly, he erupted into a booming laugh that slammed off the walls. When it finally died, he admitted, Jinyan had no intention of losing. A thoughtful shadow crossed his face. He zeroed in on Jinyan, eyes probing every inch with surgical focus. He watched Jinyan's ice-cold calm and quietly had to admit, This man was impossible to read. He peered with hawk-eyed focus, and still couldn't pin down the young man's primary fighting style, couldn't gauge his true power, and couldn't tell if he even cared for his sister. Despite Yoon Seol's reputation as the Snow Phoenix, Jinyoon treated her like a ghost. Yoon-wol saw the man's mind devoured by a single, all-consuming hunger for strength. Across the table, Jinyoon leaned in, eyes cutting into the fist guard as he scrutinized him again. A breathy, awestruck murmur slipped out. A masterfully forged weapon, born to defend. Time surged forward. Outside the siblings' house, Jinyoon bowed, voice steady as he vowed they'd meet again, and Yoon-wol and Yoon Seol called out, wishing him safe travels. Jinyoon's silhouette receded down the path, slipping away into the distance. Yoon Seol spun to her brother, eyes flashing, and fired. "What's your move for the Dragon Phoenix tournament?" Yoon-wol froze, thoughts folding into silence for a beat, then fired off her reply. He admitted he'd finally met someone worth his time, while everyone else obsessed over winning the tournament instead of forging real camaraderie. And with a calm smile, he yielded to young Master Lee. Yoon Seol's eyebrows shot up. She realized he was flat-out refusing to take part. She slapped her palms together in a tiny, mocking clap and sneered that his words were very eloquent. And he rolled his eyes and shot back that she was truly shameless. After a pause, a memory slammed into him and he burst out laughing again. And amid his chuckles, he replayed Jinyoon's words from their first meeting, echoing them with a grin. He whispered, words pouring with liquid eloquence and drifting down like autumn leaves. Yoon Seol's brow knotted as she snapped, "What are you even talking about?" He flicked his hand away and shrugged. Nothing. Just a random thought. A smirk split his face as he declared Jinyoon was unmistakably blunt. He hadn't so much as tried to flirt, and didn't look like the chasing type. Yoon Se-il pouted, asking if Jinyoon was just pretending to be uninterested. But Yoon-wol shook his head. He was sure Jinyoon genuinely didn't care about her. She crossed her arms and muttered she didn't care about him either, and Yoon-wol burst into booming laughter. Then his voice softened as he coaxed her to live freely. Look, feel, and enjoy herself. In life, he said, she'd meet merchant heirs who outmuscled martial heirs and noble heirs fouler than bandits. Not every Murim ally was a hero, and not every underworld man had lost his honor. He urged her, see the world for yourself, listen closely, then choose the man you'll come to love. He capped it with a warm smile, dismissing his earlier teasing as nothing and telling her not to take it to heart. Yoon Seol's let a faint smile flicker across her face and replied, I understand. Yoon-wol nodded, then smirked, saying Jinyoon's audacity still stunned him. He'd flippantly tossed out the names Namgoon, Wee, and Duck Gohan, like they meant nothing, and if any of them had heard it, they'd have drawn their swords on the spot. Before either sibling could choke out another word, a deep, furious voice thundered from behind them, freezing blood in their veins. Did I just hear that right? Yoon-wol and Yoon Seol pivoted slowly toward the voice, as a man closed in on deliberate, measured steps, anger sharpening his face, and his icy tone snapping for them to repeat exactly what they'd just said. It was none other than Duck Gohan, the future patriarch of the Duck Go clan. Rage carved into his face as he glared at them and thundered, Who dares say that? Yoon-wol slammed into silence, his confidence draining away as he croaked, trembling, that he was too terrified to even open his mouth, and beside him, Yoon Seol leaned in, whispering urgently and begging her brother to keep silent before he made the situation worse.